The courier's van pulled away before Eli could reach the door, its taillights dissolving into the drizzle that had been falling since morning. On the stoop sat a cedar suitcase, scuffed and dark with moisture, its corners reinforced with tarnished brass that had gone green in places. A manila envelope was taped to the handle, and through the rain-spotted plastic Eli could make out a name written in careful script. A relative's handwriting, someone from the old country branch of the family, someone Eli had successfully avoided thinking about for 3 weeks and 4 days. The linen cord wrapped around the case was the colour of old teeth, wound through the handle and around the body in a pattern that looked deliberate, tied off with knots that were small and tight and impossibly complex. Eli stood in the doorway, rain beginning to darken the shoulders of an oversized sweater, and felt something settle in the stomach like a stone dropping into still water. Inside the apartment, Eli set the suitcase on the living room rug, a cream-coloured thing inherited from a better phase of life, and immediately the air changed. Not dramatically. Not like a door opening or a window breaking. Just a thin alteration in the way breath moved, a scent threading through. Cloves, lamp oil, and something earthier, like soil after a burial. The smell of a house Eli had visited exactly once, for exactly 3 hours 7 years ago. The phone buzzed. A text from a cousin whose name Eli had to read twice to place. "So sorry for your loss. Let me know if you need anything." The message sat there, cursor blinking in the reply field. Eli's thumbs hovered. Then the phone went dark and Eli set it face down on the kitchen counter. In the silence that followed, 3 soft knocks came from inside the suitcase. Not loud, not aggressive, polite even. The sound of knuckles on wood, patient and deliberate, like someone testing whether anyone was home. Eli stepped back. The suitcase sat exactly where it had been placed. Cord still damp, brass still tarnished. The knock did not repeat. For a long time, Eli stood in the kitchen, listening to the rain tap the windows and the building's ancient pipes groan through their evening routine. When the phone buzzed again, another cousin, another condolence. Eli deleted the notification without reading it, and went to bed with all the lights on. The dream was the same one that had been cycling for weeks, sitting shiver in a house that smelled like mothballs and too many people in one room, listening to cousins whisper in the hallway while the adults pretended not to hear. Eli had been maybe 10, maybe 12, wearing clothes that itched and shoes that were too tight, counting the minutes until it would be acceptable to leave. The cousins had been older, high school age, and they spoke in that conspiratorial way teenagers do when they think they know something forbidden. One of them, Rachel, maybe, or Ruth, had used a word Eli didn't know, Dybbuk. She said it with weight, like it meant something more than just a sound. "It's a spirit that won't let go," she'd whispered, and the other cousins leaned in. When someone dies and you didn't say what you should have said, when you swallowed the apology or pretended you'd have time later, it can catch on that silence. It fastens to objects, especially things the dead touched. It rides grief and borrowed breath. Another cousin had scoffed, but quietly, like he didn't want to fully commit to disbelief. "That's just superstition." "Maybe," Rachel or Ruth had said. "But my grandmother knew someone it happened to. The thing followed him everywhere, dragging its vessel like a second rib cage. Every time he said it can wait or I'll deal with it tomorrow, it came closer. How do you stop it? You carry the vessel to the threshold at dawn. You untie what the dead tied, and you read aloud everything you never said, every unsent letter, every swallowed word, and you end it by speaking the name you've been refusing to say. Then the wind can take what belongs to the world of breath." In the dream, 10-year-old Eli had pressed against the wall, trying to be invisible, trying not to think about the things already left unsaid to people who were supposed to matter. When Eli woke, the apartment was full of strange light, not dawn, but the sickly amber of street lamps filtering through rain. The suitcase had left a mark on the cream rug, a dark oval like the shadow of lungs, like something had been breathing through the fabric. The phone showed 17 unread messages. Eli opened the text thread, started typing, "Thank you, I appreciate," then stopped, deleted it. The cursor blinked. Eli put the phone down. From the living room came a sound like fabric dragging across wood. When Eli went to look, the suitcase had moved. Not far, maybe an inch, maybe less, but it was closer to the bedroom door than it had been. The linen cord gleamed dully in the lamplight, still damp, still impossibly knotted. Eli touched the cord. It was cold, and the texture was wrong. Not like linen should feel, but denser, more organic, like touching the wall of a lung. When Eli jerked back, the taste of cloves flooded the back of the throat, and underneath it something darker, earthier, like drinking water from a well that had been sealed too long. The kitchen tap ran for a full minute before the water tasted right again, and even then it sat wrong in the stomach, heavy and chemical. That night Eli lay in bed scrolling through old photos, the kind that accumulate in phone storage and never get deleted. There were pictures from before, family gatherings where everyone smiled too hard, holiday tables where the tension lived in the spaces between people, and there, 6 photos deep, the relative, the one whose name Eli had successfully avoided saying aloud for 3 weeks and 4 days. The face in the photo was familiar in the way family faces are, seen often enough to recognise, not often enough to really know. There had been a falling out years ago, something about money or maybe respect or maybe just the slow accumulation of small cruelties that families excel at. Eli had taken a side without meaning to, had let silence do the work of words, had thought there would be time later to fix it. There had not been time later. Eli deleted the text thread without replying and turned off the phone. In the dark, the suitcase knocked 3 times, polite, patient, waiting. The dresser was old, a thrift store find from a previous apartment, with brass pulls that had probably been pretty once. In the morning they were all rotated exactly a quarter turn, no longer aligned with the grain of the wood but twisted sideways, like a row of bent fingers trying to point at something just out of frame. Eli straightened them. By evening they had turned again. The bathroom mirror developed a problem. Not a crack, not a stain, but a persistent fog that bloomed from the centre outward, even when the shower hadn't been running, even when the air was dry. When Eli wiped it with a towel, words appeared in the condensation, traced backward as if written from the other side. Fragments of old arguments, the punchline to a cruel joke that had pretended to be teasing, a nickname that had always carried a barb. Eli spat in the sink. Something black stayed on the tongue. A grit that had no substance but wouldn't wash away no matter how much water Eli drank. It tasted like soil and cloves and the particular staleness of air that hasn't moved in a long time. The phone buzzed constantly now. Cousins asking about the estate, about paperwork, about whether Eli had received the package. Eli typed replies and deleted them. Typed and deleted until the screen went dark from inactivity. Each time a message went unanswered, the suitcase moved. Never when Eli was looking directly at it, but always perceptible. An inch toward the bed, then another, then half a foot, until it was close enough to touch from where Eli slept. The dark oval on the rug spread like a stain, like moisture seeping up from beneath the floorboards, though when Eli pressed a hand to it the fabric was dry. The cord rubbed against the floor with a sound like breathing, like something rhythmic and patient wearing away at wood. At night Eli could hear it even through pillows pressed over ears, a soft back and forth that matched the cadence of a heartbeat. Work became impossible. Eli would sit at the laptop and find the keys sticking, or the cursor drifting, or the screen flickering with shapes that weren't quite images, just the suggestion of them, like shadows cast by objects that weren't there. Emails went unanswered, deadlines slid past. When the boss called, Eli let it go to voicemail and thought I'll deal with it tomorrow. The suitcase shifted another 6 inches. Sleep came in fragments now, broken by sounds that shouldn't exist. Knocking. Always knocking. But not from the door, not from the walls, from somewhere closer. The suitcase had worked its way half under the bed, the cord scraping the floorboards raw, leaving pale grooves in the wood like fingernail marks. Eli dragged it out one night, hands shaking, and held it at arm's length. The knocking continued, rhythmic and steady, and Eli realized with a jolt of horror that it matched, exactly matched, the beating of Eli's own heart. When Eli looked away, the rhythm stuttered, then resumed, always synchronizing, always listening. The vents began exhaling air that was the wrong temperature. In summer, the apartment stayed cool, in winter warm, the HVAC system cycling predictably through its routines. But now the air that pushed through the metal grates was neither hot nor cold. It was body temperature, blood temperature, and it carried sounds with it. Not words exactly, but the shapes of words, vowels torn at the edges, consonants that caught in the throat. They spoke in pet names no one had used in years, diminutives that belonged to childhood, terms of endearment that had curdled into weapons. Eli stuffed towels in the vents. The whispers came through anyway. The dresser fought back now when Eli tried to open it. The brass pulls would twist in hand, rotating against Eli's grip, and for a moment, just a breath, just a heartbeat, there would be resistance, as if someone on the other side was holding the drawer shut, refusing to let go. Then it would release all at once, and the drawer would slide open to reveal clothes that smelled like cloves and lamp oil and earth. The mirror in the bathroom clouded over every few hours, and each time the breath print was wrong. Too low, too wide, as if someone much larger, or much older, or much more collapsed, had pressed their mouth to the glass from the other side. It would linger for minutes, refusing to fade, the moisture collecting and dripping down in slow rivulets that looked like tears. At night, the apartment door chain lifted and fell, not violently, not like someone was trying to break in, just testing gently, the way you might test the weight of something you were considering picking up. Lift, drop, lift, drop. The sound carried through the walls, through the closed bedroom door, relentless and patient, and from the suitcase, knock, knock, knock. Then silence, as if whoever was inside had to pause to gather breath, to save air, to prepare for the next round of patient, polite persistence. Eli stopped eating. Food tasted like soil. Water tasted like it had been drawn from a cistern sealed since childhood. Sleep came only in exhausted fragments, and even then the dreams were full of whispers and knocking, and the feeling of something watching from just outside the frame of vision. The phone was a brick of unread messages now, a weight of obligations and questions and people asking, "Are you okay?" and "We're worried and please just let us know you're alive." Eli would pick it up, open a message, start to type, and then the taste of cloves would surge in the back of the throat and the screen would blur and the words would dissolve before they could be sent. It can wait, Eli thought. I'll deal with it tomorrow. The suitcase shifted closer. It was 3 a.m. when Eli finally understood. The realization came not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, a tightening in the chest that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with recognition. The knocks weren't random. They weren't threats. They were invitations, reminders. The patient, persistent rhythm of someone who had been waiting a long time and was willing to wait longer, but who could not simply leave. Every choked-off reply, every deleted text, every voicemail left unheard fed it. The silence was fuel. The avoidance was permission. And it would keep coming, keep knocking, keep dragging itself closer until Eli either opened the door or became the kind of hollow thing that could be filled with borrowed breath and clinging grief. Eli sat up in bed, heart hammering against ribs, and said out loud to the empty room, "Enough." The apartment went still. Even the pipes stopped groaning. The suitcase, half visible in the darkness at the foot of the bed, made no sound. Eli got up and turned on every light in the apartment, then went to the closet and pulled out the box that had been shoved to the back, the one that had travelled through 3 moves and never been opened. Inside, letters, drafts of emails never sent, printed transcripts of text conversations that had ended mid-sentence, voicemails saved to the cloud and never played, a decade's worth of words that had been composed and then swallowed, of apologies that had died in the throat, of things that had seemed too difficult or too painful or too late to say. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, a sympathy card from 7 years ago, signed but never mailed, addressed to the relative whose name Eli still could not bring to the tongue. Eli carried the box to the kitchen table and spread its contents out like evidence, then sat hands shaking and waited for the sky to change colour. Dawn came slowly, the way it does in cities, not with a clean break of light, but with a gradual shift from black to grey to the thin blue that precedes morning. Eli watched it through the window, watched the street lamps flicker off one by one, watched the world begin its daily resurrection. When the first true colour touched the horizon, not pink, not gold, just the barest suggestion of illumination, Eli stood and walked to the suitcase. Up close, the knots in the linen cord were even more complex than they'd appeared. They were small and tight and layered, packed with dust and what looked like pollen or spice, and they seemed designed not just to hold but to seal, to close something off from the world. The cord itself was stiffer now, almost brittle, as if it had been drying for years in some airless space. Eli dragged the suitcase to the apartment door and set it on the threshold, positioning it carefully so that it sat half inside the apartment and half in the hallway. Between, neither fully in one world nor the other, the positioning felt important, ancient, like a ritual whose rules had been passed down through so many generations that no one remembered why they mattered, only that they did. The first knot wouldn't budge. Eli's fingers worked at it, nails breaking against the tightness, skin catching on the rough fibres. The cord seemed to resist, to actively pull against any attempt to loosen it. Sweat broke out on Eli's forehead. The taste of cloves and soil filled the mouth. "I'm sorry," Eli said out loud, voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm sorry I left you to die angry." The knot softened. Just slightly, just enough. The linen fibres split and the cord loosened and the first coil came free in Eli's hands. The air in the hallway shifted. Not dramatically, not like a wind, but like the suggestion of movement, like the way breath moves in a room when someone has just left it. Eli picked up the first letter, a draft from 6 years ago, an apology for missing a birthday, for not calling, for letting distance do the work of estrangement. The paper was yellowed and the ink had faded in places, but the words were still legible. Eli read them aloud, voice shaking, adding at the end, "I should have sent this. I should have picked up the phone. I should have cared more about your feelings than my pride." The second knot loosened. The air grew cooler. Something that might have been wind pushed down the hallway from some invisible source, carrying with it the smell of morning, of rain that had just stopped, of the world waking up. Letter by letter, draft by draft, Eli read. The cruel joke that had been passed off as teasing, Eli read it aloud and then said, "I knew it hurt you. I knew, and I did it anyway because it was easier than being kind." The visit that had been skipped, the excuse that everyone knew was a lie. "I could have come. I chose not to. I chose comfort over connection." The call that had gone unanswered in the hospital, the one that had come at an inconvenient time during an unimportant meeting. "You were dying, and I sent you to voicemail. I can't take that back. I can't make it right. But I need you to know I know what I did." With each confession, each truth spoken cleanly without justification or mitigation, the air changed, the temperature dropped, the staleness that had been building in the apartment for weeks began to dissipate. The cord continued to loosen, knot by knot, as if each honest word was a kind of key, unlocking something that had been sealed too long. But Eli faltered at the last letter, the sympathy card that had never been sent. It was addressed to the relative, the one whose suitcase this had been, whose things were presumably still inside, whose name Eli had successfully avoided saying for 3 weeks and 4 days, whose death had triggered all of this. The name sat on the tongue like a stone. Eli's jaw ached with the effort of not speaking it. The suitcase knocked once, sharp and warning, and the taste of soil surged up from the back of the throat, thick and choking. "I can't," Eli whispered. The hallway darkened. The wind that had been building stopped. The cord tightened again, knots reforming themselves, and from inside the suitcase came a sound like breathing, laboured and wet. "I can't," Eli said again. But even as the words left the mouth, they felt hollow, felt like another evasion, another way of saying it can wait. "I'll deal with it tomorrow. I'll face this when it's easier." And there would never be an easier time. That was the trick of it, the trap. There would always be a reason to wait, to defer, to let silence do the work of words. That was how people ended up with suitcases full of grief on their doorsteps, with spirits that wouldn't let go, with debts that could never be paid because the creditor was already gone. Eli's hands shook as they opened the sympathy card. The message inside was brief, generic, the kind of thing you write when you don't know what to say but feel obligated to say something. "I'm sorry for your loss. You're in my thoughts." It was signed with just a first name, no elaboration, no personal touch. It was the bare minimum of acknowledgement, and it had still been too much to send. "You deserved better than this," Eli said to the card, to the hallway, to the suitcase and whatever it contained. "You deserved a phone call, a visit. You deserved someone who showed up when it mattered instead of someone who saved their guilt for after you were gone. You deserved family that acted like family, and I didn't give you that. I can't fix it now. I can't make it right. But I can stop lying about it. I can stop pretending it doesn't matter. The cord was loose now, all the knots open except the last one. The final binding wrapped around the suitcase's latch, sealing it shut, and it would not yield. Eli pulled at it, worked at it with increasingly desperate fingers, but it held fast. "Please," Eli said to the suitcase, to the hallway, to the morning light that was growing stronger through the windows. "Please, I'm trying, I'm—" "Say the name," something whispered. Not aloud, not in words. But the knowledge arrived fully formed, ancient and certain. The last knot would only open if the last word was spoken, the name that had been swallowed for 3 weeks and 4 days. The name that carried with it all the weight of relationship and obligation and failure. Eli held it in the mouth until the jaw ached, until the pressure behind the eyes became unbearable, until the taste of cloves and soil and borrowed breath filled the lungs and threatened to drown everything. Then, finally, voice breaking, Eli spoke it. Clearly, completely. The full name, first and last, the way it had been written on the manila envelope taped to the handle, the way it had appeared in the funeral program, the way it deserved to be spoken by someone who had known the person it belonged to and had failed them anyway. A gust of wind ran down the hallway like a living thing. Not from outside, the windows were closed, but from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. It pushed across the threshold, through the open door into the apartment, and as it moved, the mirror inside the bathroom unfogged in an instant, going from opaque to clear so fast it was like watching something exhale. The suitcase gave a final exhale of its own, a sound like air escaping from a long-sealed container, and the scent of cloves thinned to something lighter, cleaner. Just wood shavings, just the natural smell of old cedar. The cord came free in Eli's hands all at once, the last knot dissolving like it had never been there. The lid of the suitcase rose, not all the way, just a finger's width, just enough to show darkness inside, just enough to let something out or let something go. Then it dropped back down on its own, latching with a soft click. No knock followed. Eli sat on the threshold, legs shaking too badly to stand, and held the cut cord and the stack of reed letters in numb hands. The hallway was silent now, just the normal sounds of a building waking up, pipes groaning, doors opening on other floors, someone's alarm clock going off with tinny insistence. Inside the apartment, the dresser pulls were just pulls, the mirror was just a mirror. When Eli finally stood and went to the kitchen, the water from the tap tasted like water, cold and clean, and free of the weight it had been carrying. Eli wrapped the cord and the letters in plain brown paper, taped it shut with careful precision, and left the bundle outside the apartment door. Not in the trash, not hidden away, just there, available, offered to the city's air and the morning's light and whatever unnamed mechanism took care of things that had been carried too long. By noon, it was gone. Eli didn't see who took it, didn't hear footsteps or voices. It simply wasn't there anymore, and that was enough. The suitcase itself Eli put in the closet, no longer on the threshold but not thrown away either. It was just a suitcase now, just cedar and brass and linen, and when Eli opened it, carefully, respectfully. The contents were ordinary. Clothes that smelled like mothballs, a pair of reading glasses, a book in a language Eli couldn't read but recognised from childhood visits. Things that had belonged to a person. Not a Dybbuk, not a curse, just someone who had lived and died and deserved to be remembered better than they had been. Eli kept the book, put the clothes in a donation bag, took the glasses to a cousin who collected such things, replied to the messages finally with words that were simple and honest. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I needed time. Thank you for your patience." Life didn't transform. The apartment didn't become magically lighter or brighter, but the dresser pulls stayed, aligned. The mirror stayed clear. The vents exhaled air at the temperature they were supposed to, and when Eli thought it can wait, when the impulse to defer or avoid or swallow words rose up in the throat, there would sometimes appear on the cream-coloured rug a small dark oval, just for a moment, just a breath, a soft warning. And Eli would pick up the phone, or write the email, or say the difficult thing, because the alternative had been learned too well and at too high a cost. Months later, cleaning out the closet for a move to a smaller place, Eli found the suitcase again and ran a hand over the cedar lid. It was just wood, warm under the palm, silent and still. But when Eli started to pack it with books, started to think I'll call that cousin later, I'll send that apology tomorrow, from somewhere deep inside the grain came 3 soft knocks. Polite, patient, waiting. Eli put the suitcase down, picked up the phone, and made the call that had been waiting. The knocking stopped. The wood was just wood again. And when the conversation ended, awkward but honest, uncomfortable but real, Eli repacked the suitcase with care and carried it to the new apartment, where it sat in the closet smelling only of cedar, unless the silence grew too long, unless the words stayed swallowed too deep. And then it remembered, gently and persistently, how to knock. The new apartment was smaller, a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had been beautiful once, maybe in the 1920s, before decades of neglect had turned its ornate mouldings into crumbling plaster and its hardwood floors into a patchwork of water stains and gouges. Eli chose it for the price and the location, not for charm, and moved in on a Tuesday when the sky was the colour of old cement. The suitcase went into the bedroom closet, wedged between boxes of winter clothes and a broken lamp that had been meaning to be fixed for 2 years. For weeks it sat there, silent and inert, just an object among objects. Eli built a new routine. Work, groceries, sleep, repeat. Answered messages promptly. Called family on Sundays. Said the difficult things when they needed saying, even when the words caught in the throat like fish bones. But routines are fragile things, and grief has a way of circling back when you think you've outrun it. It started with the downstairs neighbour, Mrs. Castellano, an elderly woman who baked too much and brought the overflow to Eli's door in tinfoil-covered plates. She talked too long in the hallway, her stories looping and repetitive, full of grandchildren Eli would never meet, and complaints about the building super who never fixed anything. Eli would stand there, one hand on the doorframe, nodding and smiling and thinking about all the things that needed doing inside. One Thursday she knocked with banana bread still warm from the oven, and Eli was in the middle of a work deadline, the kind that actually mattered, the kind that could mean a promotion, or at least job security. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Castellano," Eli said, taking the plate but not opening the door wider. "I'm really swamped right now. Can we catch up later?" Her face fell just slightly, a small collapse around the eyes that people get when they've been lonely too long and mistake proximity for friendship. "Of course, dear, later." Eli closed the door and thought, I'll stop by this weekend, bring her some tea, make up for it. Set the banana bread on the counter and went back to work. That night the suitcase knocked. Not loud, not insistent. Just 3 soft raps, the same patient rhythm coming from the bedroom closet. Eli froze at the kitchen table, laptop screen casting blue light across knuckles gone white with tension. The knock didn't repeat. When Eli finally worked up the nerve to check, the closet was just a closet, the suitcase just a suitcase, everything exactly where it had been. But the cream-coloured rug, the one that had made the move despite the stains, despite the dark oval that had never quite washed out, showed a new mark. Small, barely visible in the lamplight, but there, a second oval, overlapping the first like a Venn diagram of accumulating debt. Eli didn't stop by Mrs. Castellano's apartment that weekend. The work deadline bled into another deadline, and then there was a friend's birthday dinner that ran late. And then it was easier to just wave in the hallway and promise soon we'll have coffee soon while already walking away. The knocking came more frequently. Not every night, but often enough. 3 raps, always 3, always patient. The rug accumulated marks like a tree accumulating rings, each one slightly darker than the last, until the overlap created a shadow that seemed to pulse in peripheral vision. Eli tried moving the suitcase to the hall closet. The knocking followed. Tried the storage unit in the basement, and woke at 3 a.m. to the sound echoing up through the floorboards, through 4 stories of sleeping building, like something was banging on the inside of the earth itself. The suitcase came back to the bedroom closet. The knocking continued. Mrs. Castellano stopped baking, stopped appearing in the hallway. When Eli finally knocked on her door, 3 weeks later, feeling guilty, carrying store-bought cookies as penance, there was no answer. A neighbour mentioned she'd had a fall, was in the hospital, might not be coming back. Eli stood in the hallway holding the cookies and felt something cold settle in the chest. But there were visiting hours to consider and work to finish, and it was easier to think, I'll go tomorrow, I'll call and find out which hospital, I'll make time soon. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became a month. The hospital became a nursing home, and then the apartment downstairs was cleaned out by relatives Eli never met, and Mrs. Castellano's things appeared on the curb in trash bags that sat there for 2 days before the city took them. Eli never sent flowers, never called, never said goodbye. The night after the trash bags disappeared, Eli woke to find the suitcase had moved. Not just shifted, moved. It was no longer in the closet, but sitting at the foot of the bed, exactly where it had been in the old apartment, the linen cord wrapped around it in a pattern Eli didn't remember seeing before. The knots were back, small and tight and impossibly complex, and they glistened in the darkness like they were wet. When Eli reached out to touch one, it was slick. Not with water. With something thicker. Warmer. The fingers came away stained dark, and in the bathroom the light revealed what looked like blood. Old blood. The brown-black colour of something that had dried and been reconstituted, that had been waiting a long time to be noticed. Eli scrubbed hands until the skin was raw, but the stain stayed under the fingernails, in the whorls of the fingerprints, like it had soaked into the skin itself. The water in the sink ran brown for a long time, and when it finally cleared, the drain smelled like copper and soil, and something underneath that was almost sweet, the way meat smells when it's just started to turn. The mirror fogged over, not slowly, not from steam, but all at once, like something had pressed its whole body against the glass from the other side. When Eli wiped it away, the condensation was thick, viscous, leaving streaks that looked less like water and more like the residue of something that had been breathing moisture that was too dense, too organic, too close to the consistency of fluid from lungs that had been drowning. In the streaks, words, "You promised later." Eli staggered back. The bathroom tiles were cold against bare feet, and the fan rattled overhead, and somewhere in the apartment the suitcase knocked 3 times and then was silent. Sleep didn't come that night. Eli sat at the kitchen table, laptop open but unseeing, watching the sky lighten from black to grey while the taste of copper filled the mouth. Every swallow felt like swallowing clay. Every breath tasted like the inside of a grave. At work, things began to slip. Emails went unanswered, meetings were missed. The boss, a tired woman named Sarah who had always been fair, always been patient, pulled Eli aside and asked with genuine concern, "Are you okay? Do you need some time off?" "I'm fine," Eli lied. "Just been busy." Sarah's expression said she didn't believe it, but she nodded and let it go, and Eli felt grateful and guilty in equal measure, and thought, "I'll do better. I'll get my act together. Just need a few days to sort things out." That night the dresser pulls started turning again. All of them, rotating in unison, twisting until they were perpendicular to the drawers, and when Eli tried to straighten them they fought back with that same horrible resistance, like hands were gripping them from inside the wood, like something was holding on and refusing to let go. One of the pulls came off in Eli's hand, not cleanly, not like a screw had, loosened but like it had been ripped away, and underneath was a hole that was too dark, too deep, that seemed to go further into the dresser than the dresser's dimensions should allow. When Eli looked into it, something looked back. Not eyes exactly, but the suggestion of them, the sense of attention focused and hungry and patient. Eli dropped the pull. It hit the floor and rolled under the bed, and from under there came the sound of the suitcase's latch clicking open, not all the way, just a finger's width, just enough to exhale a breath of air that smelled like cloves and lamp oil and rotting earth, and underneath it all the copper-sweet reek of old blood. The apartment began to change in small ways that accumulated like interest. The walls developed stains that weren't water damage, that spread in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like reaching hands or opening mouths. The floorboards warped in places, creating valleys and ridges that made walking difficult, that caught at the feet and made Eli stumble. The windows stopped opening, the locks stopped locking. The light switches worked intermittently, so that the apartment was plunged into darkness at random moments, and in that darkness things moved with sounds that weren't quite footsteps, but close enough to make the skin crawl. Eli started sleeping with the lights on again, but it didn't help. The bulbs flickered and dimmed and sometimes went out entirely, and in those moments of darkness the suitcase would knock. Not 3 times now, but more, a sustained rhythm like someone pounding to be let out, like someone who had been patient for a long time and whose patience was finally running out. The rug stains had merged into a single dark mass that covered most of the floor, that squelched underfoot like the carpet was soaked through, though when Eli touched it the fabric was dry. Dry but wrong, the texture changed, more organic, like touching skin that had been preserved poorly, that had started to break down but hadn't fully rotted yet. Sarah called. Eli didn't answer. She called again. Voicemail. Look, I'm worried about you. You've missed 3 days in a row without calling in. I need you to contact me, or I'll have to assume you've abandoned the position. Eli stared at the phone, started to call back, and the taste of copper surged so thick it induced gagging. The phone clattered to the floor. The screen cracked. By the time Eli picked it up, the voicemail notification was gone, and the impulse to call back had dissolved into static and the thought, I'll deal with it tomorrow. The suitcase moved closer. It was fully out from under the bed now, sitting in the middle of the room, impossible to ignore. The cord was slick with that viscous brown-black fluid, and the knots seemed to pulse like they had their own heartbeat. The cedar had darkened, the brass had tarnished completely, and the whole thing emanated a warmth that was wrong, that was body temperature, that was the heat of something living pressed against something dead. At night Eli heard it breathing. Not knocking anymore, but breathing. Long, slow inhalations and exhalations that rattled wetly, that sounded like lungs full of fluid, like someone drowning on dry land. And under the breathing, sounds that might have been words or might have been the random syllables of decay, fragments of arguments, pet names spoken with venom, the particular cruelty of family who know exactly where to cut. The bathroom mirror no longer cleared. The fog was permanent now, thick enough that Eli's reflection was just a blur, just a suggestion of a shape. But other shapes appeared in it, clearer than Eli's own face. Mrs. Castellano, younger than she'd been, standing in a hallway and holding banana bread and waiting for someone who would never come. Sarah at her desk, head in her hands. The relative whose name Eli had finally spoken but whose memory had not been honoured, had not been kept, had been allowed to fade back into silence and avoidance, and all the small cowardices that accumulate into larger betrayals. The figures in the mirror didn't move. They just stood there, watching, waiting, their eyes dark and their mouths slightly open like they wanted to speak but had been robbed of breath. Eli stopped looking in mirrors. The vents exhaled constantly now, a humid warmth that made the apartment feel like the inside of a mouth, and the whispers that rode the air were clearer, more distinct. Full sentences in voices Eli recognized, asking why, asking how could you, asking don't you care at all. They layered over each other until they were a choir of recrimination, a symphony of disappointment, and underneath it all the wet sound of the suitcase breathing, breathing, breathing. The hallway outside the apartment became difficult to navigate. The fluorescent lights flickered and failed, plunging the corridor into darkness that was too complete, too absolute, like stepping into a space where light had never existed. Eli's door was the only one that seemed to exist anymore. The other apartments had disappeared, or their doors had become walls, or they had always been walls and Eli had simply forgotten. When Eli tried to leave, actually leave, pack a bag and walk out and not come back, the doorknob wouldn't turn. Not locked, but stuck, or maybe fused to the strike plate, or maybe the door itself had stopped being a door and had become just another wall. Eli pulled and twisted and finally beat fists against it, until the skin split and bled, and the blood on the door looked black in the flickering hall light and soaked into the wood, like the wood was thirsty for it. From inside the apartment, the suitcase knocked, rhythmic, insistent, calling Eli back. The food in the apartment spoiled rapidly now. Bread grew mould overnight, thick green-black colonies that spread like maps of impossible countries. Milk curdled in sealed containers, fruit rotted from the inside out, the skin staying, perfect while the flesh liquefied into something that smelled like meat left too long in heat. Eli stopped eating. The hunger became just another sensation to ignore, like the thirst, like the exhaustion, like the growing certainty that the apartment was shrinking, that the walls were closer than they had been, that the ceiling was lower, that the space was contracting around Eli like a fist closing. The suitcase sat in the centre of the bedroom floor and now it leaked. The brown-black fluid pooled around its base, spreading in slow ripples that defied gravity, that crawled up the walls and across the ceiling, that left trails like slug tracks but smelled like decay and copper, and the particular sweetness of flesh giving up its shape. Eli tried to move it, grabbed the handle and pulled, and the handle was hot and slick and felt like grabbing something's wrist, like the suitcase had grown skin, and when Eli jerked away, the palm was covered in that fluid and it burned, not like fire but like frostbite, a cold that went bone deep and turned the fingers numb. The mirror in the bedroom, a full-length one Eli had bought years ago and never quite liked, cracked, not into random fractures but into a deliberate pattern, lines radiating from a central point like something had punched it from the inside. In each fragment a different reflection, Eli at different ages, different moments of failure and avoidance, different instances of choosing comfort over courage. Child Eli ignoring a classmate who needed a friend. Teenage Eli lying to a parent. Adult Eli at a funeral, mouthing condolences and thinking about what to have for lunch. The fragments began to leak. Not the brown-black fluid, but something clearer, thinner, that ran down the mirror like tears and pooled on the floor and evaporated into a mist that tasted like salt and regret when Eli breathed it. The breathing from the suitcase grew louder, more laboured, punctuated now by wet clicking sounds like a tongue against teeth, like someone trying to form words with a mouthful of fluid, and then finally horribly it did form words, not spoken but exhaled, each syllable a bubble of rot. Open! Me! Eli backed against the wall, heart hammering so hard it felt like the ribs might crack. No. Open! Me! Say! My! Name! I did. I said it. I did what I was supposed to do. The suitcase's latch began to rattle, the lid lifting and falling, and each time it opened a crack wider. Inside was darkness so complete it hurt to look at, and in that darkness shapes moved, pressed against the opening, trying to force their way out. Said, once, forgot, again, promised, later, later, later. The apartment's walls began to weep. Not the brown-black fluid, but something else, something clear and viscous that smelled like formaldehyde, that ran in sheets and gathered in the corners and began to rise, pooling ankle-deep, then calf-deep, cold and stinging where it touched skin. Eli waded through it, to the kitchen, grabbed the box of letters and drafts that had made the move, that had been shoved under the sink and forgotten. The cardboard was swollen with moisture, disintegrating in Eli's hands, but the papers inside were still readable, still covered in words that had been meant to matter and then hadn't mattered enough. But there were new gaps in the collection. The sympathy card was gone. The letter to Mrs. Castellano that Eli had drafted and never sent, gone. The apology to Sarah for the missed days, the explanation that had been composed in a moment of clarity and then deleted, never printed, never saved, erased like it had never existed. You let them go again. The fluid was waist-deep now, rising steadily, and it was getting harder to move through it, harder to breathe as the chemical smell burned the lungs. The suitcase floated, bobbing like a body, and its lid was open now, not all the way, but enough to see inside, enough to see the shapes that pressed against the opening that were trying to crawl out. They were hands, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all reaching, all grasping, all the same brown-black colour as the fluid, all slick and decaying and desperate. They clutched at the edges of the suitcase, pulled themselves upward, and where they touched the wood they left prints that smoked and sizzled. Eli tried to reach the door again, but the fluid was chest-deep and the door had definitely become a wall, smooth and unbroken and impassable. The windows were walls too. The apartment had sealed itself, had become a container, and the fluid kept rising. Say, their names. I don't remember all of them, Eli gasped, choking on the fumes on the rising tide. I can't. The hands erupted from the suitcase in a wave, dozens of them reaching up and out, grabbing at the air, at the walls, at anything they could reach. They found Eli's legs first, wrapped around ankles and calves with strength that was horrible, irresistible, and they were so cold they burned, left marks on the skin that blistered immediately, that wet fluid that mixed with the rising pool. Eli screamed and kicked and went under, the chemical liquid flooding mouth and nose and eyes, and under the surface the apartment was different, larger, impossibly vast, a space that extended in all directions into darkness. The hands pulled deeper, and Eli could see their owners now, figures in various states of decay, some fresh enough to be recognizable, some rotted to bone, all reaching, all pulling, all silently demanding the attention that had been denied them. Mrs. Castellano, her face slack and disappointed. Sarah, her eyes empty. The relative whose name Eli had spoken once and then allowed to fade. A childhood friend Eli had ghosted, a partner Eli had left without explanation. Classmates, co-workers, neighbours, family, everyone who had been promised later, and for whom later had never come. They pulled Eli down into the dark, into the space beneath the apartment, beneath the building, beneath the world, into the place where postponed obligations accumulated like sediment, layer upon layer, until they became geology, became the bedrock of existence itself. And at the bottom, in the deepest dark, the suitcase sat waiting, fully open now, empty and infinite and hungry. Eli's lungs burned. Vision went spotty. The hands were everywhere, holding, pulling, and their touch was so cold it stopped being cold and became a different kind of burning, the burn of frostbite and necrosis, of tissue giving up and dying cell by cell. This is it, Eli thought with strange clarity. This is what happens when you run out of later. But the hands stopped pulling. They held Eli suspended in the dark, in the fluid, in the space between drowning and dying, and they waited. Not patient anymore, not polite, just waiting, the way creditors wait, the way obligations wait, with the certainty of eventually being paid. Eli's mouth opened, not by choice, not voluntarily, but because the lungs demanded air even if what rushed in was liquid poison. And with that involuntary opening came words, forced out by the pressure of the fluid, by the grip of the hands, by the weight of every postponed apology and swallowed confession. Names. All of them. Every person Eli had promised later to and then forgotten. They came out in a stream, a litany, a confession that tasted like chemicals and copper and rot, but that came nonetheless, unstoppable, each name buying a few inches of upward motion, each admission purchasing a few more seconds of existence. The fluid began to drain. Not quickly, but perceptibly, the level dropping as the names continued, as the accounting was finally horribly balanced. The hands released their grip one by one as their owners were named, acknowledged, given the attention they had been owed, and they sank back into the dark, dissolving into the fluid like they had been made of it all along. Eli broke the surface, gasping, retching, vomiting up chemical liquid and bile, and something darker that might have been blood or might have been the residue of borrowed breath finally being returned. The apartment was the right size again, the walls in their proper places, but everything was stained. The floors, the ceiling, the furniture, all of it marked with the brown-black fluid, all of it reeking of decay and formaldehyde and copper. The suitcase sat in the middle of the bedroom floor, closed again, the cord wrapped and knotted, but the knots were looser now, more easily read. They weren't random. They were a list, written in the language of binding and constriction. Every person, every postponed obligation, every later that had curdled into never. And at the very end of the cord, the final knot, was a name Eli didn't recognize at first. Had to stare at it, had to trace the pattern with shaking fingers, had to sound it out syllable by syllable before understanding came. It was Eli's own name, the final knot. The final obligation. The mirror, the full-length one, was no longer cracked. It showed Eli's reflection clearly, but the reflection was wrong. Thinner than it should be, more translucent, like an image projected on smoke. And behind the reflection, visible through it like looking through dirty glass, was the inside of the suitcase, dark and vast and waiting, patient as it had always been, ready to receive what would eventually inevitably come. Eli understood then what the suitcase really was, what it had always been. Not a curse, not a punishment, just a mirror, just a container for everything that had been borrowed and not returned, for every moment of connection that had been postponed into non-existence. It would wait as long as it took. It had infinite patience. Because in the end, everyone runs out of later. Everyone eventually has to face what they've spent their life avoiding. The question was only whether that facing would be chosen or forced, whether it would be now or after the debts had accumulated so far into arrears that the cost of payment became unbearable. Eli looked at the final knot, the one that bore Eli's own name, and understood that it could be untied the same way the others had been, by doing now what had been postponed until later, by saying now what had been swallowed into silence, by choosing connection over comfort while there was still time to choose. The alternative was to wait, to let the knot tighten, to add more names to the cord until it became a noose, until the suitcase was so full of borrowed breath that it could only be opened from the inside, and by then it would be too late to speak at all. Eli's hands were shaking so badly the phone almost slipped, but the call went through. Sarah answered on the third ring, her voice wary. "It's me," Eli said. "I know I've been terrible. I know I've let you down. I'm not asking you to forgive me or even to understand. I just need you to know that I know what I did, and I'm sorry, and I'm trying to do better." Silence on the line. Then, "Are you okay? You sound awful." "I will be. I'm working on it. Can I come in tomorrow? Can we talk?" Another silence, then carefully, "Yes, tomorrow. But Eli, if you need help..." "I know. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow." The call ended. Eli's fingers found the final knot and it was already looser, already beginning to yield. One by one, Eli called them all. Everyone on the list that was still alive to receive a call. Everyone who could still hear an apology and choose whether to accept it. Some hung up, some were angry, some were confused. But all of them were named, acknowledged, given the attention they had been owed. By dawn, the knot was loose enough to untie. Eli worked it free with hands that ached, with fingers that were blistered and raw from the chemical fluid, and when it finally came undone, the cord fell away and the suitcase opened on its own. Inside, nothing. Just cedar and empty space and the lingering smell of wood shavings. The darkness was gone. The hands were gone. Whatever had been living in the borrowed breath had been released, had been given back to the world of air and wind and the living. But the suitcase didn't disappear. It sat there, empty, but not benign. A reminder and a warning. Because the knots could always come back. The cord could always be retied. Every later was a potential binding. Every postponed connection a thread waiting to tighten into obligation, into debt, into the kind of weight that eventually dragged you down into dark water and held you there until you drowned. Eli understood now that the suitcase would never truly be gone. It would always be there, in the closet or under the bed or sitting patient in peripheral vision, waiting to see whether the lessons learned would hold or whether the old patterns would reassert themselves, whether "I'll do it now" would become "I'll do it later," would become "it's too late," would become another name tied into the cord. The apartment still smelled like chemicals and decay, but it was getting better. The stains were fading. The walls had stopped weeping. The fluid had drained away, leaving only residue that could be scrubbed clean with enough time and effort. Eli cleaned, scrubbed the floors until the stains lifted, wiped down the walls, replaced the broken mirror, threw out the rug, the one with the dark ovals, the one that had carried the weight of too many postponed obligations, and bought a new one, plain and cheap and unmarked. The suitcase went back in the closet, but not shoved to the back, not hidden behind boxes and forgotten. It sat in plain sight, door open, a reminder that needed to be visible to do its work. And sometimes, late at night, when Eli thought about putting off a difficult conversation, or postponing an apology or letting a connection lapse into silence, the suitcase would knock. Just once, just a reminder. And Eli would pick up the phone, or write the email, or say the difficult thing, because the alternative had been learned too well and at too high a cost, and because the suitcase was patient and empty and always waiting to be filled again. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The rain came down in fine threads, the kind that made the window screens hum. Leah stood in the kitchen doorway, phone vibrating in her pocket for the third time in an hour, and she didn't reach for it. She'd been too tired all week, too tired to reply, too tired to explain why she couldn't reply, too tired even to feel guilty about it anymore. The message preview had said, "Please call when you can," and she'd swiped it away like clearing condensation from glass. She needed water, that was all. Just water, then back to bed. Then maybe tomorrow she'd have the energy to be the friend she was supposed to be. The kitchen tile was cold under her bare feet, and she was halfway to the sink when she saw it. A white frangipani blossom, rain-wet and perfect, lying in the centre of the floor. The petals held droplets that caught the refrigerator's LED glow like tiny planets. Leah stopped. The windows were shut. They'd been shut since Tuesday when the rain started, since she'd decided the sound of water was better than the sound of her phone. She picked up the blossom. It was cold and slick, the way flowers get when they've been outside in a storm, and when she squeezed it gently, water ran between her fingers. Behind her, the refrigerator's compressor kicked on with its usual wheeze, and something else moved. A second blossom, riding the air current from the vent, spinning slowly on the counter like it was being turned by invisible fingers. By breath. Leah's phone buzzed again. She looked at it this time. "Are you okay?" "You haven't answered in days." She silenced it. Not off, just silenced, because turning it off would be a decision and silence was just postponement. Tomorrow. She'd text tomorrow. She always meant to text tomorrow. From the bathroom, down the short hallway, came a sound like the drain swallowing. A thick, wet gulp that seemed to echo up through the pipes. Leah dropped the frangipani into the trash and went back to bed without the water. She'd heard the story from her grandmother once, years ago, when she was young enough to half believe in things that hid in trees. The Pontianak, her grandmother had said, was what happened when a woman died wronged, when she'd been hurt or abandoned, or simply left unheard until the silence itself became a kind of violence. She came back with hair long and black and always wet, with nails like thorns, with a sweetness that arrived first and the rot underneath that came after. She hid in banana trees, her grandmother said, and you could tell which ones by the scratches high on the leaves and the frangipani blossoms that appeared where they shouldn't. "If you keep saying, 'I'll call tomorrow,'" her grandmother had said, smiling in that way old people smile when they're not entirely joking, "she will stand behind the glass and ask with her nails." Leah had laughed. She'd been 17, invincible, certain that ghosts were for people who needed excuses for their guilt. The binding ritual, her grandmother had explained, required 3 things: a white cloth, a comb, and an iron nail. You had to go to the nearest banana tree at midnight when it was raining, tie back the hair with the cloth, comb it until it was smooth, press the nail into the trunk, and speak the name you'd been avoiding. The name of the person you'd wronged. Only then would the blossom stop falling. Leah hadn't thought about that story in a decade, but when she woke up on Thursday morning and found the frangipani on her kitchen floor, and when she opened her laptop and saw 15 unread messages from the same person, the story surfaced in her mind like something dredged up from deep water. She typed out a reply. "Hey, sorry been swamped. Can we talk this weekend?" Her finger hovered over the send button. The cursor blinked. She deleted it. She'd send something better later. Something that didn't sound like an excuse. Friday morning, the tub coughed up hair. Leah had run the shower, was waiting for the water to warm when she noticed the drain. A coil of long black hair rose from the holes like a sea creature surfacing, slick and impossibly thick, too much hair for any one person to lose. She stared at it. The hair moved slightly in the water current, seeming to reach, and she grabbed a fork from the kitchen and used it to lift the coil free. It tightened around the tines. Not like hair catching on metal, but like something alive. Something with intention. She dropped the fork and the hair into the trash and ran the shower hot enough to steam the mirror, hot enough to make her skin pink and raw, but when she got out and wiped the glass, she still felt cold. That night the frangipani came back. 6 of them this time, arranged in a perfect ring on the kitchen floor, each one rain-wet despite the windows still being shut, despite the weather report showing clear skies. Leah stood in the centre of the ring, phone in hand, staring at a message that had arrived an hour ago. "I'm worried about you. Please just let me know you're alive." She started typing. "I'm alive. Just need some space right now." She deleted it. "Sorry, work has been insane." Deleted. "Can I call you tomorrow?" Her thumb hovered. She locked the phone instead and put it face down on the counter. Outside her window, the banana trees that grew in the narrow courtyard between apartment buildings swayed in a wind she couldn't feel. She went to the glass and looked down. Even in the streetlight's orange glow, she could see the leaves clearly, and the 3 clean scratches that ran down the length of the nearest leaf, perfectly parallel, like something with long nails had dragged them slowly from top to bottom. The apartment was starting to smell different. Not bad, exactly. Sweet, like gardenias or jasmine, the kind of sweetness that was pleasant for the first few breaths, and then became cloying, heavy. The kind of sweetness that made you want to open a window but also made you afraid of what might come in. Leah went to bed. She put in earbuds and played rain sounds from an app, the fake kind that looped every 6 minutes. and she pretended the sweetness was just her imagination, just her guilt taking shape in her sinuses, just the price of being too tired to care. Saturday morning, she woke to 17 new messages and a smell that had gone iron sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase, like the moment before the water goes black and oily. She didn't check the messages. She got up, brushed her teeth, made coffee, and went about her day as if nothing was different, as if the scratches on the banana leaves hadn't multiplied overnight. 5 of them now, higher up, closer to her 3rd-floor window, as if the frangipani ring hadn't reappeared even though she'd thrown away the blossoms and scrubbed the tile with bleach. She had a video call for work. She set up her laptop, checked her hair in the camera preview and joined the meeting. For 45 minutes, everything was normal. She spoke when spoken to, nodded at the right moments, typed notes she'd never read again. Then, in the middle of a sentence about quarterly projections, her voice distorted, just for a beat, just for half a second, into something that wasn't her voice at all. A whisper, dry and distant and somehow wet at the same time, like words spoken through rain-soaked fabric. Her co-worker paused. "Sorry, Leah, you cut out for a second. Can you repeat that?" "I said the numbers look good," Leah said, and her voice was her own again, but her hands were shaking. After the call, she sat in the silence of her apartment and listened. The refrigerator hummed. The pipes ticked as they cooled. Somewhere, faint enough that it might have been her imagination, came the sound of something being combed, long, slow strokes, the teeth clicking softly against knots, patient and methodical and endless. She checked the banana leaves. 7 scratches now, each one higher than the last, climbing toward her window like a count, like a calendar marking days she'd failed to respond. That night, more frangipani. She stopped counting. They appeared in places flowers shouldn't be, behind the toilet, inside the microwave, pressed between the pages of a book she hadn't opened in months. Each one was cold and wet, and when she touched them, her fingers came away smelling like funeral homes and sweetness, and something else underneath, something that made her stomach turn. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look. She knew what it would say. She knew the messages were getting shorter, the tone shifting from worried to hurt to resigned. She knew that somewhere, someone was waiting for a response that wasn't coming. Someone was wondering if they'd done something wrong. Someone was lying awake and feeling the specific pain of being ignored by a person who'd once promised to always be there. Leah put her phone in a drawer, out of sight, just for tonight. Tomorrow she'd deal with it. Tomorrow she'd find the right words. The power flickered. Sunday evening, just as the sun was going down. Leah was in the living room, laptop open but not really working, just staring at the screen and watching her cursor blink. The light stuttered, went out, came back. In that moment of darkness, something changed in the apartment. The air got thicker, the smell intensified. When the lights returned, they seemed dimmer, and the shadows in the corners didn't quite match the furniture that cast them. She needed to pee. Simple, biological, unavoidable. She got up and walked to the bathroom, flipped on the light and froze. The mirror was fogged, completely fogged, as if someone had just taken a long hot shower, even though she hadn't run the water in hours. The fog was thick enough that she couldn't see her reflection, thick enough that moisture was beginning to drip down the glass in slow rivulets that looked like fingers, like something on the other side was trying to wipe the condensation away. Leah's heart kicked against her ribs. She should leave. She should turn around and walk out and maybe leave the apartment entirely, go to a hotel, go anywhere that didn't have banana trees outside and frangipani blooming in impossible places. But her body didn't listen. Her hand reached out, seemingly of its own accord, and swiped a circle in the fog, clearing a porthole of glass. A woman stood behind her. Not in the bathroom was empty. Leah could see that when she whipped around, could see the plain tile and the white shower curtain, and the empty space where no one was standing. But in the mirror, in the reflection, the woman was there. Hair matted to her collarbones in thick, wet ropes. Head tilted at an angle that was almost Leah's angle, but not quite. Like a photograph printed slightly off register. Mouth hidden behind strands of black hair that moved gently as if underwater. And the nails, long and curved and pressing against the other side of the mirror, pressing hard enough that Leah could hear them. A soft scratching like a comb through wet hair, patient and persistent and getting closer. Leah couldn't move, couldn't breathe. could only watch as the woman in the mirror tilted her head further, as the hair parted just enough to show a mouth, as that mouth opened and... The drain gurgled. Leah's eyes snapped down to the tub and the hair was there again, the thick coil of it, but this time it was moving, rising from the drain like a snake, dragging itself along the tub's lip with a rubbery squeal that made Leah's teeth ache, reaching toward her with deliberate slowness. She looked down at her feet. The frangipani had arranged themselves in a ring again, the petals touching, encircling her bare ankles like a noose, and she was standing in the centre and she hadn't noticed, hadn't felt them appear, hadn't heard anything but the sound of her own pulse hammering in her ears. She backed toward the window. The bathroom window, the small one with the frosted glass that looked out onto the courtyard. Her shoulders hit the wall. Something moved outside and she turned just in time to see 5 crescent shapes appear on the outer surface of the glass. Scratches, thin and precise, appearing at eye height as if someone very tall was standing on the other side and dragging their nails down the pane, not cutting through, just etching, marking, measuring. The banana tree below swayed, though there was no wind. One of the broad leaves bent, tapped against the building's brick, once, twice, and Leah understood with sudden, terrible clarity that it was counting floors, measuring distance, calculating how much further it needed to climb. Her phone buzzed in the other room, the sound muffled by the drawer but still audible in the thick silence. Still awake? Please? Leah's hand moved without her permission, reaching for her phone, but she stopped herself. She'd respond tomorrow. She had to. Tomorrow she'd have the energy. Tomorrow she'd find the words. Tomorrow she'd be better. She turned the phone face down in the drawer and closed it. The apartment exhaled. That was the only way to describe it. A long, slow breath that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the pipes, from the gap under the bathroom door. The sweetness intensified, and underneath it, finally impossible to ignore, was the smell of rot. Of things that had been beautiful once, and were now breaking down, were now becoming the soil that fed more beauty, the cycle that never ended. Leah looked at the kettle on the stove, stainless steel and polished enough to reflect. In its curved surface, distorted but unmistakable, her reflection smiled. The smile was too wide, stretched a fraction too far at the corners, and the eyes didn't blink. They just stared, watching her watch herself, and the reflection's hand lifted, slowly, finger by finger, and pointed toward the window where the banana trees grew. Monday morning, Leah called in sick. She couldn't go to work, couldn't pretend anymore that this was just stress or exhaustion, or guilt manifesting in strange ways. The hair in the sink had come back, thicker this time, enough that it clogged the drain entirely and she had to scoop it out with her bare hands, had to feel it wrap around her wrists like living rope. The scratches on the banana leaves had climbed higher, 9 of them now, 10, 11, reaching past her window toward the 4th floor where an elderly couple lived who probably couldn't see clearly enough to notice the marks. The frangipani were everywhere, in her bed, cold and wet against her pillow, in her shoes, in the medicine cabinet, in the sugar bowl. She'd stopped cleaning them up. What was the point? They'd just come back, multiplying like cells, like proof of something she'd done or failed to do, something that was growing in the space between her and the person she'd been ignoring. 23 unread messages now. She'd stopped looking at the previews, but the number haunted her. 23 attempts. A connection. 23 moments when someone had thought of her, had hoped for a response, had been disappointed. She sat on the couch and tried to think. The story her grandmother had told her. It was just a story, wasn't it? Old superstition. The kind of thing people invented to explain coincidence and guilt and the way bad feelings could make a space feel haunted even when it was empty. But the hair had been real. The scratches were real. The woman in the mirror, tilting her head at the wrong angle, had been as real as Leah's own face. To bind her, bring a white cloth, a comb, and an iron nail at midnight to the nearest banana tree. Leah didn't have a white cloth. She had dish towels with patterns on them, had t-shirts that had once been white but were now grey from too many washes. She didn't have a comb either, just a brush, bristles instead of teeth. Wrong for what the ritual required. And an iron nail? Where did you even buy something like that? Hardware stores carried stainless steel now, galvanized metal, screws instead of nails. But she had to try. The alternative was to keep pretending, keep waiting for tomorrow, Keep letting the scratches climb until they reached her door. Until the woman behind the glass came through. She got dressed. Jeans, sneakers, a jacket with deep pockets. She went to the store 3 blocks away, the one that sold everything from vegetables to duct tape, and wandered the aisles until she found what she needed. A white cloth napkin, crisp and starched and probably meant for fancy dinner parties. A wide-toothed comb made of wood, the kind you used for detangling, and in the hardware section, covered in a thin layer of dust like no one had bought one in years, a small box of iron nails. The label said they were for antique restoration, for people who wanted things to look old-fashioned, for people who cared about matching the original materials. She paid in cash, didn't look at the cashier, walked home with the items in her pockets feeling heavier than they should, feeling like they were pulling her down with the weight of what she was about to do, what she was finally acknowledging needed to be done. That night Leah tried to sleep but couldn't. The smell had gotten worse, had progressed beyond iron sweet into something that made her gag if she breathed too deeply. The frangipani had started appearing in her peripheral vision, white flashes that vanished when she turned her head, like something was placing them just outside her field of view and moving them whenever she looked directly. The scratching sound was constant now, so soft it was almost subliminal, but she could hear it under every other noise, under the refrigerator's hum, under the traffic outside, under her own breathing. At 11:45 she got up, put on her jacket, checked her pockets, cloth, comb, nail, all there. She opened the drawer where she'd hidden her phone and looked at the screen. 31 messages now, the most recent. One had arrived 6 minutes ago. I don't know what I did wrong. I'm sorry for whatever it was. I just want to talk. Leah's finger hovered over the notification. She could open it, could read the rest, could type out a response right now, could explain that it wasn't about them, that it was about her, about being too tired and too overwhelmed and too afraid that anything she said wouldn't be enough, wouldn't fix things, would only make them worse. She could say all of that, and maybe it would help. Maybe it would stop the scratches from climbing. Maybe it would send the woman in the mirror back to wherever she'd come from. But the clock on her phone said 11:47, and her grandmother's instructions had been specific. Midnight when it was raining, at the nearest banana tree. If she stayed to text, she'd miss the time. If she tried to do both, she'd do neither properly. Tomorrow, she thought, after the ritual, after she fixed this. Tomorrow she'd have the words. She put the phone down and walked out of her apartment. The hallway was dark. The building's lights were on motion sensors that never worked properly, and they stayed off as Leah moved toward the stairs. Her footsteps echoed. Behind her she heard a door open. Not her door, but somewhere. One of the other apartments. And then close again softly, like someone checking to see if the hallway was safe. The stairs were worse. Each step down revealed another frangipani blossom, white against the concrete, and when she put her foot down, the petals crushed with a soft, wet pop that sounded too much like flesh, like stepping on something that had once been alive. She counted. 7 stairs, 7 blossoms. By the time she reached the ground floor, her shoes were slick with flower pulp and water that smelled like funerals. The door to the courtyard was propped open with a brick, and Leah stepped through into the rain that had started exactly at midnight. The kind of rain that felt orchestrated, that felt like the world was following a script written long ago. The banana trees were darker than the night around them. Their leaves hung heavy and still despite the rain, and as Leah approached the nearest one, the smell hit her full force. Beautiful and wrong, sweet and rotten. The smell of things that grew in secret and bloomed where they shouldn't. More frangipani littered the ground around the trunk, so many that she couldn't avoid them, and each step sent up a little spray of wet petals and decay. She stopped at the tree and pulled out the white cloth. Her hands were shaking. The rain plastered her hair to her face, and she had to wipe her eyes to see clearly. The cloth felt too clean for this, too innocent, like bringing a baptismal gown to a burial. She laid it across her forearms the way her grandmother had described, like an offering, like she was presenting something precious, and she spoke. The words came haltingly at first, choked by shame and fear, but they came. "I owe someone," Leah said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I owe them responses I didn't give. I owe them time and attention and the simple fucking courtesy of acknowledging they exist. I kept saying tomorrow. I kept pretending I was too tired, too busy, too anything. I chose silence because it was easier than facing how much I'd already let them down. The banana leaves rustled. Leah looked up. From the lowest leaf, the one with 11 scratches, something was hanging. Hair. Long and black and dripping, thick enough to be a rope. And as Leah watched, it moved. Slowly, deliberately, reaching down toward her like the tentacle of something much larger that was hiding in the tree's shadow. She wanted to run. Every instinct she had screamed to drop the cloth and the comb and the nail and get away, get back inside where there were walls and doors and locks. But she'd come this far. She'd acknowledged what she'd done. If she ran now, the scratches would keep climbing. The woman in the mirror would keep pressing against the glass, and eventually something would break through. Leah raised the cloth. The hair lowered itself into it, coiling like a living thing, cold and impossibly heavy. She wrapped the cloth around it carefully, feeling the weight increase with each fold, feeling the hair shift and move against the fabric as if it were breathing. Then she took out the comb. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Not to the tree or the hair or the banana leaves, but to the person she'd been ignoring, the person who deserved better than her silence. "I'm so sorry," she combed. The teeth snagged on knots, and she worked them free gently, the way you'd comb a child's hair after swimming, patient and slow and careful. The hair began to smooth. With each stroke it seemed to relax, to settle, and the smell, the overwhelming sweetness, began to fade into something more neutral, more like wet earth and rain. Something leaned close. Leah felt it before she saw it. A cold weight near her shoulder, a presence that displaced the rain so that a dry patch appeared on her jacket sleeve, the outline of something tall and thin and patient. She didn't look up. Looking up would break the ritual. Looking up would show her the face, if there was a face. And her grandmother had never said anything about looking, had only said to tie and comb and name. "Maya," Leah said, and the name felt like vomiting, like expelling something that had been rotting inside her for weeks. "Her name is Maya. She's my best friend. She's been going through hell and I knew it and I didn't answer. I told myself I needed space, but I was just afraid. Afraid I wouldn't say the right thing, wouldn't fix it, wouldn't be enough. And the longer I didn't answer, the worse it got, until not answering became easier than facing how much damage I'd done." The hair in the cloth loosened, just a fraction, just enough that Leah felt the weight shift, felt something release. "I should have said I love her," Leah continued, tears mixing, with rain on her face. "I should have said I'm here even when I don't have solutions, even when I'm scared, even when I don't know what to do. I should have answered the phone at 2 a.m. when she needed someone. I should have been brave enough to be imperfect instead of being too afraid to be anything at all." The banana trunk was in front of her, slick with rain and surprisingly warm under her palm. She pulled out the nail, iron, old-fashioned, the kind that people didn't make anymore except for purposes like this, for rituals, for binding things that needed to be bound. She pressed it against the bark and pushed. The trunk resisted at first, the bark tough and fibrous, but then the nail sank in slowly, biting into the living wood beneath. Leah pushed harder, feeling the metal slide deeper, feeling resistance give way to acceptance. The hair in the cloth shuddered once, then went completely still. The smell of sweetness vanished entirely, replaced by nothing but rain and earth, and the clean scent of green things growing. The presence near her shoulder withdrew. Leah felt it go, felt the warmth return to the space where something cold had been leaning. She finished pushing the nail until only the head remained visible, until it was secure and permanent and done. The banana leaves above her stopped moving. The scratches were still there. She could see them even in the dark, but they stopped at 11. They didn't climb higher. The counting had ended. Leah walked back to her apartment with the white cloth folded around the comb, both of them tucked into her jacket pocket where they felt like penance, like promise. The frangipani and the stairwell were gone. The hallway lights flickered on properly when she passed. Her door opened without resistance, and the apartment inside smelled only of apartment, neutral and empty and waiting to be filled with whatever came next. She went to the bathroom first. The mirror was clear. No fog, no woman, no fingers pressing against the glass. Just Leah, looking exhausted and drenched and older than she'd looked 2 weeks ago. Her eyes were red from crying, or from the rain, or from both. Her mouth was small and uncertain. She washed the comb in the sink, watching the water run clear, watching nothing but water circle the drain. She dried it carefully and folded the white cloth around it, then carried both to the window where the banana trees grew outside. She set them on the sill like a marker, like a reminder of what happened when you chose silence over difficulty, avoidance over discomfort. Then she got her phone. 34 messages. The number sat there like an accusation, like proof of how far she'd let things go. She opened them, read them all, watched the progression from worried to hurt to angry to resigned to the final message that had arrived while she was in the courtyard. I love you, but I can't keep doing this. I need you to decide if you want me in your life, Leah typed with shaking fingers. No excuses, no explanations that would sound like excuses, just the truth. I'm sorry. I've been a terrible friend. I was afraid I wouldn't have the right words, so I didn't say anything and I let my fear hurt you. I'm here now if you'll talk to me. If you won't, I understand. But I need you to know I love you and I'm sorry and I should have said that weeks ago. She pressed send before she could second-guess it, before she could revise or delete or decide to try again tomorrow. The message flew away into the digital void and all she could do was wait. The apartment was quiet. No drains gurgling, no refrigerator hum carrying impossible flowers, no scratching under the other sounds. Just silence, the kind that felt earned rather than stolen, the kind that came after you'd done something hard instead of avoiding it. Leah didn't know if Maya would respond. Didn't know if the damage could be repaired, or if she'd waited too long, if she'd let too many tomorrows pile up until they'd become a wall neither of them could climb. But she'd said it. She'd named what she'd done wrong. She'd pressed the nail into the trunk and tied back the hair and combed until it was smooth. That had to count for something. She lay down in bed, still in her wet clothes, too tired to change. The pillow didn't have frangipani on it. The sheets were just sheets. Outside her window, the banana trees swayed in the wind that had picked up after the rain stopped, and the scratches on the leaves were visible in the streetlight's glow. 11 of them, frozen at the number they'd reached. A permanent record of how long she'd waited. But they weren't climbing anymore. She woke to grey light and the sound of her phone buzzing. For a moment, panic seized her. It was happening again, the messages piling up, the demands she couldn't meet. But then she saw the notification and her heart lurched differently. I'm so angry at you. I've been so worried and hurt, and I didn't know if you were okay or if I'd done something to drive you away. But I love you too, and I'm glad you finally said something. Can we talk? Actually talk? Leah read it 3 times. 4. She pressed the call button before she could lose her nerve, and Maya answered on the second ring. Hey, Maya said, her voice rough like she'd been crying or not sleeping or both. Hey, Leah said. I know I don't deserve... Stop, Maya interrupted. Don't start with what you don't deserve. Just talk to me. Tell me what happened. Tell me why you disappeared. So Leah told her. Not about the Pontianak, not about the hair and the flowers and the woman in the mirror. Those were for her alone, the price she'd paid for her silence. But she told Maya about the fear, about feeling inadequate, about worrying that anything she said would be wrong, about how the longer she waited, the harder it became until not responding felt like the only option. She told her about being so tired she couldn't see past her own exhaustion, about being so scared of failing Maya that she'd guaranteed it by not trying at all. Maya listened. When Leah finished, Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Leah braced herself for anger, for rejection, for the justifiable end of a friendship she'd neglected. That's really fucking stupid, Maya said finally. Leah laughed, startled. I know. I didn't need you to have answers. I just needed you to be there. Even if you were just on the phone breathing while I cried, that would have been something. Anything would have been something. I know, Leah said again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, well, Maya sighed. I'm not saying it's fine. It's not fine. You hurt me. But I'm also saying I hear you, and I want to try to get past it. If you're actually going to show up now, if you're actually going to answer when I call instead of making me wait for tomorrow that never comes. I will, Leah promised. No more tomorrows, no more silence. Even when I'm scared, even when I don't know what to say, I'll say something, I'll be there. They talked for an hour, then 2. Leah sat by the window with the white cloth and the comb on the sill beside her, watching the banana trees sway in the morning breeze, watching the leaves hold their scratches without adding new ones. The apartment stayed quiet. The drains stayed clear. No frangipani appeared on the kitchen floor. When they finally hung up, Leah felt lighter. Not forgiven entirely, that would take time, would take proof through action rather than words, but heard, seen, acknowledged in return for finally acknowledging someone else. She made coffee. She showered in a bathroom that smelled only like soap and steam. She got dressed and opened her laptop and started the day like a normal person, like someone who hadn't spent 2 weeks haunted by her own failures. But she kept the comb and the cloth by the window. She checked them every morning, made sure they were still there, still clean. A reminder, a promise. A small price to pay for learning that sometimes tomorrow never comes, and sometimes the ghosts we create are the ones we feed with our silence. The next rain came 3 days later. Leah woke to the sound of it threading through the window screens, familiar and no longer frightening. She got up, went to the kitchen for water, and found the floor empty. No blossoms, no cold petals, nothing but tile. She looked out at the banana trees. The scratches were still there. They'd always be there, she thought. A scar on the leaves like the scar on whatever friendship she and Maya rebuilt, but they hadn't climbed. The tree was just a tree again, broad leaves catching rain, roots digging deep into courtyard soil. On the sill outside her window, dry against the glass despite the weather, lay a single frangipani. Its petals were white and perfect and completely, impossibly dry. When Leah opened the window to touch it, the blossom crumbled at her fingertips. Not wet, not rotting, but dry as paper, as if it had been pressed in, a book for years. She looked down at the banana tree. The leaves held their height. 11 scratches, no more. The tree seemed to be waiting. Not scratching, not counting, just waiting. As if it had learned a different kind of patience, the kind that came from being heard instead of ignored. Leah closed the window. She left the remains of the dry blossom on the sill next to the white cloth and the comb, another marker, another memory. Then she picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, looking for other names she'd been avoiding, other people she'd told herself she'd respond to tomorrow. She started typing. One message, then another, then another. No more tomorrows, no more silence. Just words, imperfect and honest and sent before she could delete them, before she could decide they weren't good enough. The rain continued. The banana trees swayed. The apartment stayed quiet except for the sound of her phone sending messages, the soft whoosh of each one flying away into the world, carrying small truths that were better than beautiful lies. And in the bathroom, when she passed the mirror, only Leah looked back. Tired, guilty, trying. Her mouth its normal size, her eyes finally blinking at their proper speed, her reflection doing nothing but reflecting what was actually there. No one stood behind her. No nails pressed the glass. The drain breathed its last wet breath and settled into ordinary silence. Outside, the banana tree held its scratches like a closed book, and the frangipani stopped falling. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The December rain came down in needles, tapping against the apartment windows with a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. Eva stood in the narrow entryway of her third-floor walk-up, keys still dangling from the lock, and listened to the sound blur with distant sirens until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The sirens had that particular frequency tonight, high and wavering, almost musical. Almost like sleigh bells, if sleigh bells could sound like warning. She kicked the door shut behind her and peeled off her coat, letting it fall across the arm of the futon because she was too tired to care about the wet wool smell it would leave. 3 double shifts in 5 days. The holiday rush at the call centre meant everyone wanted answers, solutions, someone to absorb their frustration about delayed packages and cancelled orders. Her throat was raw from 8 hours of manufactured patience. The apartment was cold. She'd turned the heat down before leaving that morning, trying to shave another $20 off the utility bill. Eva padded across the laminate floor in damp socks, flicking on lights as she went. The kitchen was barely more than a galley, just enough room for one person to stand between the counter and the appliances, but it was hers, and that had mattered once. Now it just felt small. She opened the fridge for the leftover pad thai, the only dinner plan she had energy for. The interior light flickered on, illuminating mostly empty shelves, a carton of eggs, some wilted spinach, condiments in the door. But there, held against the white surface by a magnet she didn't recognize, was a piece of paper. Eva stared at it. The magnet was shaped like a sleigh bell, tarnished silver with a small clapper visible through the slotted metal. She'd never seen it before. The paper beneath it was yellowed, the edges soft like old parchment, and across the top in elaborate script that looked hand-lettered ran the words, "Good List." Below the header, her name, Eva Winters. The script was old-fashioned, the kind of penmanship her grandmother might have used, all careful loops and measured slants. She reached out slowly and touched the paper. It was cool, slightly damp, and beneath her name were several blank lines ruled in faint grey, stretching down the page like staff paper waiting for notes. As she watched, ink began to form on the first line, not printed, not typed. The letters appeared stroke by stroke, as if an invisible hand were writing in real time, the ink spreading like watercolour into the fibres. The handwriting matched the header, that same old-fashioned script. Told Mom I was busy. I wasn't. Eva jerked her hand back. The paper fluttered but stayed pinned beneath the bell magnet. She looked around the kitchen, turned to check the living room behind her. The apartment was empty. The rain kept needling the windows. Somewhere in the building, pipes groaned. She looked back at the page. The line was complete now, perfectly. Formed, accusatory in its simplicity. It was true. Tuesday afternoon, her mother had called asking if Eva wanted to come by for dinner. Nothing special, just the two of them. And Eva had said she was swamped with work obligations. She'd said it while scrolling through social media on her couch, half watching a reality show she'd seen before. It had been easier than explaining she just didn't want to make the drive, didn't want to field questions about whether she was eating enough, sleeping enough, meeting anyone. "This is insane," Eva said aloud. Her voice sounded flat in the small kitchen. She grabbed the paper and yanked it free. The bell magnet clattered to the floor and rolled under the fridge. The paper crumpled in her fist, and she was about to throw it toward the trash when she noticed something. Another sheet was emerging from behind where the first had been. It slid upward against the white interior of the fridge door as if being fed through from somewhere impossible. The movement was smooth, mechanical, inevitable. When it reached the position where the first page had been, it simply stopped, suspended there without anything holding it. Eva's heart began to hammer. She dropped the crumpled paper and watched as this new sheet, identical in age and texture to the first, began to fill itself in. Good List in the same ornate script. Eva Winters beneath it. And then, on the first line, reposted rumour. She had. Just this morning, between calls, she'd shared a screenshot in the workgroup chat. Something about a manager at another location, supposedly sleeping with one of the seasonal hires. Jen had sent it first, and Eva had just forwarded it along with a wide-eyed emoji. She hadn't checked if it was true, hadn't really cared. It was just something to pass the time, to feel connected to the minor drama. The kitchen smelled different suddenly. Underneath the usual scent of old coffee and the faint chemical tang of cleaning products, there was something else. Something organic and cold. Wet straw. The smell of a barn in winter. Eva backed away from the fridge until her hip hit the counter edge. She groped behind her for her phone, found it in her coat pocket hanging over the futon arm and thumbed it open. The screen glow felt reassuring, technological, real. She started to pull up her messages, thinking she'd text someone. But who? What would she even say? My refrigerator is writing a list of things I've done wrong and I don't know how to make it stop. The thought was absurd enough that she almost laughed. Almost. But the smell of wet straw was getting stronger, and the rain against the windows had picked up, and beneath it she could swear she heard something else. Something rhythmic and small. Bells, maybe. Very faint. Coming from inside the apartment. She moved through the living room slowly, listening. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When she stood still, it faded. When she moved, it grew slightly louder, tracking. Her, somehow. She ended up in the bedroom doorway, staring at her unmade bed, the pile of laundry on the chair, the closet door hanging half open. The sound was coming from under the bed. Eva knelt down, pulling out her phone and activating the flashlight. The beam swept across the wooden floor, illuminating dust bunnies and a lost sock and the cardboard corner of a shoebox full of old photos she kept meaning to sort. Nothing else. But the bells kept whispering, soft and insistent. Somewhere in the shadows her light couldn't quite reach. She stood up quickly and backed out of the room. Her grandmother's voice came to her then, unbidden. The memory so sharp it felt like the old woman was standing right behind her. There are two who walk the winter streets ever. Everyone knows about the kind one, the one who brings gifts and grace. But behind him, in his shadow, walks another, Krampus. And Krampus doesn't measure children. Children are forgiven their smallness. He measures grown-ups. He measures all the little cruelties we pretend don't matter. The white lies. The times we were too tired or too busy or too afraid to be kind. The apologies we swallowed. The help we could have given but didn't. Eva had been maybe 10 when Grandmother told her this story, sitting in the old woman's kitchen while snow piled against the windows and something warm and spiced steamed in mugs between them. The story had seemed quaint then, just another winter tale to make the dark season feel important. He keeps a burlap sack and a red ledger, Grandmother had continued, her accent thickening the way it did when she told the old stories. The sack is for carrying away, the ledger is for measuring, and if you deny what's written, if you laugh it off or stuff it away or pretend you don't see it, then he comes closer. You'll hear his bells under your bed. You'll hear his hooves counting the boards in your hallway, and when he comes close enough, when he's ready, he takes what you've been hoarding, all those small meannesses, all those withheld kindnesses. He puts them in his sack and he carries them away, and you with them. 10-year-old Eva had asked, with the straightforward practicality of a child. But how do you stop him? Grandmother had smiled, but it hadn't been a warm smile. You write the true list. Before midnight you write down what you did. No prettifying, no excuses, and what you'll do to mend it. You write it in red pen. You hang it outside your door with bread and salt, and then you say the names aloud. All of them. The people you hurt, the people you failed. You say their names and what you'll do, and if you mean it, if you really mean it, then he turns away. The true list doesn't erase what you did. That's not the point. But it shows you're willing to carry your own sack. Eva had forgotten that story, or thought she had. It had filed itself away with all the other childhood things she'd outgrown. Belief in Santa Claus, fear of the dark, the certainty that grown-ups had everything figured out. But standing now in her cold apartment with the smell of wet straw, creeping through the rooms and bells whispering from impossible places, the story came back with the weight of something that had been waiting for her to be ready to remember. The hallway floorboards creaked, just once. A long, heavy sound like someone taking a careful step, like someone measuring the distance. Eva's breath caught. The hallway was 6 feet long, connecting the bedroom to the living room, passing the bathroom door. She was standing at the living room end. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty. The boards creaked again. Closer. She scrambled back toward the kitchen, slipping a little on the laminate in her damp socks. The fridge hummed its normal hum. The second list was still there, suspended against the door. As she watched, a third line was forming. Dropped friend when she needed you. Michelle. The name came to her immediately, uninvited. Michelle from college, the one who'd stuck by Eva through the worst of the breakup with Daniel, who'd let Eva sleep on her couch for 2 weeks, who'd covered Eva's share of restaurant bills when money was tight. And then Michelle had called 6 months ago, voice shaking, saying she thought she might be having a breakdown, asking if Eva could come over, if they could just talk. And Eva had looked at her calendar, looked at the Friday night stretching ahead with its promise of no obligations and a new season dropping on streaming, and she'd said, God, Michelle, I wish I could, but I'm absolutely slammed. Can we rain check? There hadn't been a rain check. Michelle had stopped calling after that. Eva had told herself it was natural drift, that friendships evolved, that they were both busy. She'd told herself a lot of things. The phone in her hand buzzed. A text from Jordan at work. Hey, any chance you can take my Sunday shift? Family thing came up. Eva looked at the text, looked at the list on the fridge. Jordan had covered for her twice in the last month. Once when Eva had genuinely been sick, and once when she'd just been too hungover to function. She owed Jordan. It would be easy to say yes. Her thumbs moved over the screen. Sorry can't she hit send before she could reconsider. On the fridge, a new line scratched itself into existence with a sound like a pen scoring paper. Could have helped. Didn't. The smell of wet straw intensified. From the hallway came a new sound. Not footsteps exactly, but something being dragged. Something heavy and soft like a sack full of rags, or promises, Or all the small kindnesses that could have been given but weren't, all bundled up and weighing enough to bow strong shoulders. "Stop it," Eva said. Her voice came out thin. "This isn't real. This is, I don't know, carbon monoxide or something. Stress. I'm hallucinating." "Laughed it off," wrote the list. The dragging sound moved closer. She couldn't see anything in the hallway. The space remained empty, the light from the living room lamp illuminating nothing but blank walls and wooden floor, but the sound was undeniable, slow, patient, methodical. Eva grabbed the list off the fridge and crumpled it just like she'd done with the first one. She shoved both wadded papers into the trash bin under the sink, pushing them down beneath the coffee grounds and takeout containers. The bin was white plastic with a foot pedal, and she kicked the lid closed with more force than necessary. From inside the trash, paper rustled. She stepped back. The lid lifted slightly, pushed from within, and through the crack she could see ink spreading across the crumpled pages, writing through the layers of plastic, writing on the coffee grounds themselves, writing across every surface it could find. Ignored homeless man, kept jacket, made fun of co-worker's accent, saw kid drop lunch money, walked past. The list was filling in history now, reaching back through weeks and months. Some of the items Eva barely remembered. Some of them she remembered perfectly and had told herself didn't count, didn't matter, weren't really her responsibility. Said yes to friend's face, complained behind back. Promised to visit grandmother, didn't. Stole credit for idea at meeting. Laughed when they mocked the new hire. The entries multiplied, breeding in the darkness of the trash bin, and Eva realised with mounting horror that the list wasn't going to stop. It was going to keep going, compiling every petty meanness, every casual cruelty, every moment of convenience chosen over compassion, until it had catalogued her entire inventory of small human failures. She was standing in the middle of her kitchen, shaking when the power dipped. The lights didn't go out completely. Instead they browned, dropping to a dim amber glow that made everything look old and wrong. The digital clock on the microwave blinked and went dark. The fridge's hum stuttered into silence. In the new quiet, the bells were louder. They were definitely coming from under the bed. A soft, rhythmic jingling, and now that the apartment's ambient noise had dropped away, Eva could hear they were keeping time with something. It took her a moment to realise what. Her own breathing. When she inhaled, the bells whispered. When she exhaled, they chimed softly, as if something under the bed was listening, measuring, counting. She moved toward the bedroom because she couldn't help it, because the not knowing was worse than the knowing. The door was half open. She pushed it wide and stood on the threshold looking in at the shadowy space. Her bed was a queen, pushed against the far wall under the window. The rain outside had gotten harder, and it threw moving shadows across the ceiling, shapes that looked almost like they were dancing. The bells chimed. Under the door to the hallway, the door that led from her bedroom into the little corridor connecting the apartment's rooms, a shadow was moving. Not a trick of the light. An actual shadow, dense and dark, pressed against the crack beneath the door. It was shaped wrong, too wide at the bottom, and as Eva watched it seemed to yawn outward, expanding and contracting like a mouth breathing. The texture of it was wrong too, not smooth, but grainy, like burlap. The dragging sound came again, right outside the bedroom door now, heavy, patient. Eva's legs unlocked and she stumbled backward into the living room. She needed to get out, leave the apartment, go literally anywhere else. Her keys were still in the door. She could grab them, grab her coat, run down the stairs and into the rain, and knock on neighbours' doors until someone answered. But when she turned toward the front door, her eyes caught on the fridge. The list had regenerated. A whole new page, impossible and inevitable, suspended against the white surface. The litany of failures continued to write itself, line after line, a catalogue of all the ways she'd chosen ease over effort, silence over honesty, her own comfort over anyone else's need. And now names were appearing. Not just descriptions, but actual names. Michelle, promised to be there, wasn't. Jordan, owes you multiple favours, couldn't return one. Mum, pretended to be too busy, just didn't want to go. David, knew he was wrong about the report, let him present it anyway. Amy, saw her struggling with the copier, walked past. The names kept coming, each one attached to its specific failure, and Eva felt something crack open in her chest. These weren't abstract sins or vague regrets. These were real people. People who had names and faces and their own lists of hurts, and she had added to those lists. Not through malice, not through cruelty exactly, but through the slow accumulation of all the tiny moments when she'd chosen not to care. From the hallway, the boards creaked. 1 step, 2, counting. Eva ran to the peephole and pressed her eye against it, looking out into the building's common hallway. Rain-streaked light from a window somewhere painted everything grey. The hall was empty. But when she pulled back and turned around, the list on the fridge had added a line, amount skimmed from honesty. She hadn't skimmed money, but she'd skimmed truth, hadn't she? All those times someone asked, "How are you?" and she'd said, "Fine," instead of admitting she was struggling, because their concern felt like an obligation and she didn't want to be obligated. All those times she'd let someone else take blame for a small mistake she'd made, saying nothing, letting the misconception stand because correcting it would have been uncomfortable. All those times she'd practiced silence while someone else was blamed. The silence where speaking up would have cost her something small, a moment of awkwardness, a bit of social capital, the comfort of staying uninvolved. She grabbed the list off the fridge again, tearing it this time, ripping it into pieces, confetti of accusations fluttering to the kitchen floor. As the last piece fell, she heard it. From the hallway, the sound of hooves on wood. Not shoes, not boots, hooves. The cloven click of something that had never been human, striking the floorboards once, twice, 3 times, measuring the distance to her door. Eva's breath came in short gasps. She backed toward the bedroom, thinking maybe she could lock herself in, call someone, break the window if she had to. But when she passed the bedroom doorway and caught sight of the mirror, the full-length mirror hanging on the closet door, she froze. There was something behind her in the reflection. A shape, taller than any man should be, hunched beneath the ceiling as if the apartment's height couldn't quite contain it. Shoulders massive and bowed under the weight of the sack it carried, the burlap surface of the bag moving with a life of its own, bulging and shifting as if full of struggling things. The creature's head was lowered, but she could see the horns, curled and ridged like a ram's, but longer, sharper, slick with rain that dripped steadily onto the carpet. Matted fur covered its body, dark and wet, giving off that smell of straw and cold, and something older, something that had walked winter streets for centuries. It was standing right behind her, close enough that she should have felt its breath, close enough that its presence should have been impossible to miss. In the mirror, the creature's mouth opened. Too many teeth, blunted and stained, made for grinding rather than tearing. The smile was almost gentle, almost sad. Eva spun around. The room was empty, just her unmade bed, her pile of laundry, her half-open closet. Rain tapped the window. The bells under the bed chimed once, soft and final. But on the carpet, right where the reflection had been standing, was a wet patch. Dark, cold, shaped exactly like a hoofprint. Eva's knees gave out and she sat down hard on the bed. The mattress springs creaked. The smell of wet straw was overwhelming now, filling her nose and throat, making her eyes water. She pressed her hands to her face and tried to think. This was happening. Impossible or not, insane or not, this was happening. Something was in her apartment, or at the threshold of her apartment, measuring her failures and drawing closer with each denial, each deflection, each moment she tried to pretend the list wasn't real. The legend, grandmother's story, it had rules. There was a way to stop this, wasn't there? Something about truth, about bread and salt, about speaking names aloud, the true list. Eva stood up on shaking legs and went to the kitchen. The confetti of the torn list was still scattered across the floor, but she ignored it. She pulled open drawers until she found the junk drawer, the one where she threw everything that didn't have a better place. Pens, batteries, rubber bands, take-out menus, rubber bands, twist ties, a red pen. She needed a red pen. Her fingers closed around one, a cheap ballpoint she'd probably stolen from work months ago, and she pulled it out like it was a weapon. Paper. She needed clean paper. The printer was out in the living room and she was afraid to leave the lit kitchen, afraid the power would fail completely if she stepped into shadow. But she had a notepad, magnetic, usually stuck to the fridge. She peeled it off and looked at it. The top page had a shopping list from last week, items she'd never bought. Milk, eggs, bread. She flipped to a clean page. Twine. She looked around frantically. She didn't have twine, but she had, there in the junk drawer, a ball of kitchen string, the kind grandmother used to use for trussing chickens. That would have to work. Bread. She had bread, a half loaf of wheat that was probably starting to stale. In the cabinet. Salt. Next to the stove, the blue cylinder of Morton's. Eva laid everything out on the tiny kitchen table, the table that was really just a folding card table with a cloth over it, and sat down in one of the two mismatched chairs. The red pen felt hot in her hand like it was conducting fever. The notepad page was blank and waiting. From the bedroom the bells chimed. From the hallway the hooves counted. She wrote the header in careful letters, the true list. Her hand was shaking, but she forced it steady. This mattered. Maybe this was the only thing that had mattered in a long time. Grandmother's rule came back to her in pieces. Write what you did. No prettifying, no excuses. And then write what you'll do to mend it. Names, not initials, be specific. Say what you'll do and mean it, because the truth list is a promise. Eva took a breath and began. What I did. Told my mother I was busy when she invited me to dinner. I wasn't busy. I just didn't want to make the effort. What I'll do to mend it. Call her tomorrow morning. Tell her the truth. Ask if the invitation is still open. Her hand moved to the next line, and as she wrote, she felt something shift in the apartment. The pressure eased slightly, like a held breath being released. The bells under the bed quieted a fraction. What I did. Reposted a rumour about a co-worker without checking if it was true. Participated in gossip that could hurt someone's reputation. What I'll do to mend it. Delete the message. Text the group chat that I was wrong to share it. Apologise to the person if the rumour reaches them. Another line. The hooves in the hallway stopped counting. Waiting. What I did. Told Michelle I couldn't help when she reached out in crisis. I could have. I chose not to because it was inconvenient. This one was harder. Her throat tightened and her eyes blurred. She blinked the tears away and kept writing. What I'll do to mend it. Call Michelle. Tell her I'm sorry. Explain that I should have been there. Ask if she'll give me another chance to be the friend she deserved. The next item wanted to be hedged, softened. Couldn't really afford it. Wasn't sure what to say, didn't know it mattered. But Eva crushed those impulses and wrote plainly. What I did. Ignored the homeless man outside the grocery store even though I had cash and he asked politely. Kept my jacket zipped and walked past. What I'll do to mend it. Next time, give. Even if it's small. Even if I'm uncomfortable. Stop pretending not to see. The list grew. Each item felt like pulling something sharp out of her chest. Painful in the removal, but necessary. She wrote about Jordan and the refused shift. About David and the report. About Amy and the copier. About the new hire whose accent she'd laughed at. Not loudly, just a smirk shared with another co-worker. A moment of bonding through exclusion. For each one, she wrote the action and the repair. Some repairs were simple. Apologise, make amends, follow through on a promise. Others were vaguer because the harm was vaguer. How do you repair the damage of indifference? But she wrote them anyway. Pay attention, show up, choose kindness even when it's inconvenient. The fridge list had stopped writing. The trash bin was silent. The bells under the bed had diminished to barely a whisper. But from the hallway a new sound, the burlap sack being set down. Slowly, carefully, the weight of it making the floorboards groan. Eva kept writing. She wrote about her grandmother, the woman whose story had saved her tonight, and how Eva had promised to visit more after grandfather died. Had promised, and then let the weeks stretch into months. Always too busy, always meaning to go next weekend. She wrote about the calls she'd ignored, the birthday she'd forgotten. What I'll do to mend it. Visit this weekend. Bring her favourite cookies. Tell her I love her. Tell her I remember the stories. When she finished that line, the tears were running freely down her face, dripping onto the page and making the red ink blur. But the words were still readable. That was what mattered. The truth was still there. She looked at the clock on the wall, the old battery-powered one that had kept ticking through the power dip. 11:53 p.m. 7 minutes. Eva grabbed the kitchen string and tore off a length, threading it through the top of the notepad page and knotting it clumsily. The bread was in a bag on the counter. She took 2 slices, the least stale ones she could find. The salt cylinder was where she'd left it. She scooped a handful into her palm, the crystals cold and rough. She moved to the front door, juggling bread and salt and the page with its hanging string. The peephole showed the empty hallway again, still grey with rainlight, still deserted. But when she pressed her ear to the door, she could hear something on the other side. Breathing, heavy and wet like something that had been walking through December storms for a very long time. 11:55. Eva turned the deadbolt. The sound was loud in the quiet apartment. She turned the knob and pulled the door open. The hallway should have been empty. It was empty in the sense that no other tenants were there, no physical body she could point to and name. But the air was different, colder, denser. And at the far end of the hall, near the stairs, there was a shape. Taller than the ceiling should allow, it stood hunched, one clawed hand resting on a burlap sack that sat on the floor like a faithful dog. The horns curved up and back, casting shadows that defied the geometry of the available light. Rain dripped from its fur despite the hall being indoors, pooling on the carpet, and those eyes, black as coal, ancient as winter, fixed on her with an expression that might have been patience or might have been judgment, or might have been something too old to have a human name. Krampus. Eva's breath frosted in front of her face. The hallway had become cold enough that she could see it, winter manifesting where winter shouldn't reach. Her hands shook as she knelt on the threshold of her doorway, right at the border between her space and the common hall. She hung the true list from the doorknob, the string wrapped around it twice so it wouldn't fall. The paper twisted slowly, showing its lines of red ink to the dim hallway. Then she placed the 2 slices of bread on the floor just outside her threshold, side by side, and poured the salt over them in a thin stream. The crystals gleamed like snow. 11:57. Eva stood. The shape at the end of the hall hadn't moved, but it was watching. She could feel the weight of that attention, the way you can feel when someone reads over your shoulder. She looked down at the true list, at all the names written there. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse from crying, but she spoke clearly. She spoke loud enough to be heard. Michelle Morrison, I told you I was too busy to help when you were having a breakdown. I should have dropped everything and come to you. I'm sorry. I'm going to call you tomorrow and tell you that, and ask if we can try again. The words went out into the cold hallway and seemed to hang there, visible almost like her frosted breath. Jordan Lee, you needed someone to cover your Sunday shift because of a family emergency, and I said no even though I didn't have plans. I owed you 2 favours and I still said no. I'm going to text you when I'm done here and tell you I'll take the shift. Another name, another promise. Mum, Sarah Winters. I told you I was too busy to come to dinner. I wasn't busy. I just didn't want to make the effort. I'm going to call you tomorrow morning and tell you the truth and ask if I can still come. She went through them all, David and the report, Amy and the copier, the new hire whose name was Timothy and whose accent she'd mocked, the homeless man whose name she didn't know but whom she promised to see next time, really see and respond to, and grandmother. Anna Winters, I promised I'd visit more after Grandpa died. I promised, and then I let months go by because it was easier not to make the drive, not to sit with your grief. I'm coming this weekend. I'm bringing your favourite cookies, the Pfeffernusse ones from the German bakery, and I'm going to tell you I love you, and that I remembered your stories, this one especially. 11:59. Eva stopped. The list was complete. Every name spoken, every promise made. Her throat was raw, and her face was wet with tears, and she had never felt more exposed in her life, standing in her doorway with all her failures named aloud for whatever was listening to hear. At the end of the hallway, Krampus moved. He bent. The motion was slow and deliberate, like a tree bowing in wind, and lifted something from the pocket of the burlap sack. It was yellowed paper, folded and old, covered in that familiar script, the original list, the catalogue of her sins. He held it between his clawed fingers, and as Eva watched, the edges began to smoke. Not burn exactly, but smoulder, the paper curling and blackening and turning to ash without flame. The pieces drifted down like snow and disappeared before they hit the carpet. The burlap sack's mouth, which had been yawning open, drew closed. The shape of it changed, becoming less full, as if whatever had been inside All those struggling promises, all those withheld kindnesses had been released. Krampus straightened to his full height, which was impossible in the hallway's dimensions but happened anyway. His horns nearly brushed the ceiling, and rain that shouldn't exist indoors kept dripping from his fur, but his eyes were no longer fixed on her. Instead, he turned slowly, the sack lifted in one massive hand, and began to walk toward the stairs. As he moved, other doors along the hallway creaked, not opening, but shifting in their frames, as if tested. Behind them, Eva heard the sounds she'd been hearing in her own apartment, bells whispering, hooves counting, the soft drag of a sack being brought closer. He was making his rounds. She had been on the list. Maybe she was still on the list in some permanent way. But tonight she wasn't being collected. She had written her true list. She had spoken the names. She had hung her promises where they could be seen. The true list on her doorknob flapped once in a wind that didn't exist. The bread and salt sat undisturbed on the threshold. The names written in red ink didn't fade or erase. That wasn't the point. Krampus reached the stairs and descended them without sound despite his size, and then he was gone, out into the December rain, walking streets that ran parallel to the ones on any map, measuring people in the small hours of the night when the distance between who they were and who they pretended to be grew too wide to ignore. Eva stood in her doorway until the cold became too much, until her feet went numb and her fingers turned white. Then she gathered up the bread and salt, the bread to throw away, the salt to pour back in its cylinder, and took the true list down from the doorknob. She brought it inside, closed the door, locked it. The power came back on all at once, the lights brightening, the fridge humming to life, the microwave clock blinking 12 the apartment warmed. The smell of wet straw faded, replaced by the normal sense of coffee and carpet cleaner and the rain outside. Eva looked at the true list in her hands. The red ink was still bright, the names still clear. She thought about crumpling it, throwing it away, pretending this night had been a dream or a hallucination brought on by stress and too many double shifts. But that would be another denial, another evasion, another item for a future list. Instead, she took the list to the kitchen and found a piece of tape. She stuck it to the wall next to the fridge, at eye level, where she'd see it every time she made coffee or opened the refrigerator or stood doing dishes. The names looked back at her. The promises waited. Eva pulled out her phone. 12:03 a.m. Technically too late to text Jordan about the shift, but not too late to draft the message so it would be ready to send in the morning. Her thumbs moved over the screen. Hey, I'm sorry about earlier. Family emergency absolutely takes priority. I'll cover Sunday for you. Hope everything's okay. She didn't send it yet. That could wait until a decent hour. But she saved it as a draft. One promise, ready to be kept. Then she opened her recent calls and looked at Mom's number. That call could wait until morning too, but it would happen. She'd make sure of it. Michelle's number was harder to find. They hadn't spoken in 6 months. But Eva scrolled through her contacts until she found it, and she stared at it for a long time, thinking about what she'd say, how she'd explain, whether Michelle would even answer. That was a problem for tomorrow's Eva. Tonight's Eva had done what she could do, written the truth, spoken the names, made the promises visible. She looked at the wall where the true list hung, and at the fridge where no new lists were generating, and at the bedroom doorway where no bells whispered and no hooves counted. The rain outside was easing. By morning it would stop completely, leaving everything washed clean and cold and a little bit different than it had been before. Eva made herself tea, chamomile, because sleep was going to be hard enough without caffeine, and sat at the card table in her kitchen, warming her hands on the mug. The apartment was quiet except for the rain's fade and the building's normal sounds. Pipes, someone's TV through the walls, the heating system clicking on. Normal sounds, safe sounds. The sounds of a life she still got to live because she'd been willing to look at what she'd done and name it plainly. She thought about grandmother, about calling her this weekend, about the Pfeffernusse cookies and the stories she'd probably tell again. Old stories about winter and judgment and the strange grace that comes from being willing to carry your own weight instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Outside, the December night stretched on toward morning. Somewhere in it, Krampus walked, measuring and collecting, his sack growing heavier with each denial he encountered, lighter with each truth that was spoken. and on Eva's kitchen wall, written in red ink that would not fade, a list of names waited, not as punishment, not as shame, but as a reminder of promises made and the work of keeping them, one small act of repair at a time. By morning, only damp charcoal flecks remained on the stoop where the bread and salt had been. The true list still hung on the kitchen wall, its red ink bright in the winter light coming through the windows. The names hadn't erased themselves. They weren't supposed to. Eva made coffee and looked at the list while the pot burbled. She thought about the call she needed to make, the apologies she needed to speak, the way she would have to show up differently now that she'd promised to. It wouldn't be easy. Some people might not forgive her, some repairs might not hold. But the list didn't write itself anymore, and that meant something. That meant the ledger was in her hands now, and what she did with it was up to her. She picked up her phone and sent the text to Jordan. Then she took a breath and dialed Mum's number. It rang twice before her mother answered, voice surprised and pleased. "Eva? Honey? Is everything okay?" Eva looked at the true list on the wall and smiled, small and tired, but real. "Yeah," she said. "I think it might be. Mum, is that dinner invitation still open?" And outside, though she couldn't see it, December rain began to fall again, needling the windows, washing the city clean one cold morning at a time. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The late storm came down in needles, turning the city into a blur of neon and wet glass. Alex pulled their jacket tighter and ducked into the 24-hour bodega on the corner. The bell above the door announcing their arrival with a tired jingle. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed against the drumming rain, casting everything in that particular shade of yellow that made midnight feel like a waiting room. "Just batteries and tea," Alex muttered, more to themselves than anyone, scanning the cramped aisles. The bodega had that compressed quality of places open all night. Too bright, too still, stocked with the desperate essentials of insomniacs and people caught in weather. They found what they needed and brought it to the counter where an older man with grey stubble was absorbed in his phone, thumb scrolling in that endless downward motion. The transaction was mechanical. Scan, beep, total. Alex handed over a 20 and waited while the register drawer clanged open. The clerk counted out the change without looking up, placing bills first, then coins into Alex's palm. Most of the metal was cool, expected, but 1/4 landed different. Hot, almost feverish against their skin. The heat was immediate and wrong, the kind of warmth that made you check if you'd touched a stove element by accident. Alex glanced down. It was just 1/4, ordinary in every visible way, except where it had rested on the counter it left a perfect ring of condensation, as if something frozen had been pressed there for hours. The clerk didn't notice, already back to his phone. Outside, thunder rolled across the block, and the lights inside flickered once briefly before steadying. Back on the sidewalk, rain needling their face. Alex pocketed the coin and immediately felt it pulse warmer through the fabric. Their phone buzzed. Unknown number. They pulled it out just far enough to see the caller ID, then silenced it without answering, sliding the phone back into their other pocket. The coin grew hotter still, a small sun against their thigh. Thunder came again, deeper this time, and the streetlights all along the block seemed to shiver. Not flicker, shiver, the way lights look through water through current. The rain fell harder. Alex started the 3-block walk home, head down, and tried to ignore the heat spreading through their pocket like a slow fever. By the time they reached their apartment building, the coin was uncomfortable, the kind of heat that made you want to drop whatever was causing it. But when Alex fished it out in the elevator, palm up, examining it under the flickering overhead light, it looked completely normal. 1/4, a profile, a date, nothing special. Yet the moment they closed their fist around it, the heat returned, insistent. Inside the apartment, they dropped their keys on the small table by the door and peeled off their wet jacket. The coin went onto the desk where it sat innocently, catching light from the window. Alex put the kettle on and tried to shake the strange unease that had followed them home like a second shadow. That's when the memory surfaced, unbidden and clear as if someone had whispered it directly into their ear. Karen, the ferryman, the obol, a coin placed under the tongue of the dead to pay passage across the river. It was something their grandmother had told them once, years ago, but the version she'd shared wasn't the classical one. In the city version, Karen didn't wait for the dead. He came for the living who dodged their goodbyes, who let calls ring out, who avoided the hard farewells they owed. When he was near, she'd said, you'd smell river water where there was no river. You'd hear the lap of water against wood, the creak of oarlocks. The street outside would look wrong, rippling like you were seeing it from underwater. The rule was specific. Before dawn, you carried the hot coin to the nearest bridge, spoke the name you owed a farewell and paid the river to take the debt back. If you refused, if you wouldn't name it, the ferry would dock at your door instead. Alex laughed. A small, uncertain sound in the quiet apartment. Grandmother's stories, city legends. The kettle began to whistle, and they moved to take it off the burner but stopped. From somewhere, the hallway outside their door, maybe the stairwell, came a scent. Damp, organic, tannin and diesel like old river water mixed with the exhaust from boat engines. It was faint enough that Alex almost convinced themselves they'd imagined it. But then their phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number, again. This time a voicemail followed immediately. Alex watched the notification appear, watched the transcription populate in real time. This is a message from Riverside Hospice regarding... They swiped it away before finishing, setting the phone face down. Tomorrow, they said aloud to the empty room. I'll deal with it tomorrow. The coin on the desk pulsed once with heat, visible this time, a small distortion in the air above it like asphalt in summer. Alex poured their tea and carried it to the couch, determined to ignore everything. Put on something mindless, lose an hour to television, go to bed, normal evening. But as they sat, they heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound from beyond the apartment door. Lap, lap, lap. Like water against a hull, gentle but persistent. They muted the TV and listened. The sound continued, patient and regular. When they unmuted the TV, it faded beneath the dialogue, but they could feel it now more than hear it. A presence in the rhythm of the building itself. The streetlights outside the window wobbled, their glow stretching and condensing as if seen through rippling water. Alex stood and went to the window, pressing their forehead against the cool glass. The street below looked normal, wet pavement, a few parked cars, the bodega's sign still burning neon across the way. But there was something off about the depth of it all. Something flattened, like a photograph rather, than a real place. They pulled back and the condensation from their breath spread in a perfect ring on the glass. Their phone buzzed, a text from their sister. Have you called? Please tell me you called. Alex picked up the phone, thumbs hovering over the keyboard, then set it back down without responding. The coin on the desk, they could see it from where they stood, turned itself, slowly, deliberately, rotating so the stamped profile faced the apartment door. Alex watched it move and felt something cold slide down their spine despite the warmth of the room. The damp smell grew stronger. With it came a new sound, faint but distinct. A hollow thudding, wood on wood, rhythmic as a heartbeat. It seemed to come from the baseboard along the far wall, the one that ran the length of the living room. Alex knelt beside it, pressing their ear close. Thud. Pause. Thud. Pause. Like something knocking from the other side, or like an oar touching wood at regular intervals. They pulled away and noticed the baseboard was dry but somehow looked wet, the paint gleaming as if freshly splashed. The elevator chimed in the hallway, someone arriving on the floor. But the sound was wrong, muffled and distant, as though the elevator shaft had filled with fog. Alex moved to the peephole and looked out. The hallway appeared normal at first. Beige walls, worn carpet, the neighbour's wreath still hanging from the door across the way. But as they watched, something moved across the runner. A dark line, glistening, sliding from one end of the hall to the other. A narrow wake, like something had just passed through water. The carpet stayed dry. Alex jerked back from the door, heart hammering. This was ridiculous. Stress. The storm. Bad lighting. They were tired and avoiding something difficult, and their mind was playing tricks. That's all. They picked up their phone to call their sister, to prove to themselves they were being absurd, but an email notification appeared. A reminder from the hospice about visiting hours, about the importance of timely goodbyes. Alex swiped it away. Tomorrow, they whispered again. I'll go tomorrow. The apartment lights flickered and steadied. In the bathroom, where they'd left the door ajar, the tub drain suddenly exhaled. a long, cool breath that carried the scent of deep water. Alex moved to the doorway and flicked on the bathroom fan. It hummed to life, but the sound was wrong, syncopated, rhythmic. Not mechanical at all. It sounded like rowing. They backed out of the bathroom and returned to the living room, where the coin sat on the desk like an accusation. The condensation ring around it had spread, a dark halo bleeding into the scattered papers beneath. Alex reached for it, intending to throw it away, to flush it or bury it in the trash, but the moment their fingers touched the metal, it burned so hot they gasped and pulled back. The coin remained on the desk, but now it was rotating again, slowly, that profile turning until it faced the door once more. The phone rang, not buzzed, rang, full volume, the old-fashioned trill Alex had set as the ringtone years ago and never changed. Unknown number. They watched it ring, every instinct screaming to answer, but fear held them frozen. Fear of the conversation, fear of what they'd hear, fear of the finality waiting on the other end. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. The thudding from the baseboard grew louder. Alex grabbed their keys and jacket, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here. But when they reached for the doorknob, they stopped. Through the crack at the bottom of the door, water smell poured in, thick, green, ancient. The kind of smell that belonged to rivers at their deepest points, where light never reaches and things rest on the bottom undisturbed for years. And beneath that smell, a sound, creaking, wood under strain, oarlocks moving in their sockets, something large shifting its weight from side to side. They looked through the peephole again, and this time the hallway was gone. In its place, darkness, punctuated by the passing of narrow slatted boards, like dock planks sliding beneath an invisible viewer. A lantern swung past, golden and slow, illuminating nothing. The light moved at the pace of a ferry crossing calm water, steady and inevitable. Alex stumbled back from the door and looked up. On the ceiling, impossible and clear, a reflection of water rippled in lazy circles, casting moving shadows, despite there being no source of water anywhere in the room. The phone buzzed. Another text from their sister. "Please, he's asking for you." Alex read it, fingers trembling, and set the phone down without replying. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word had become a mantra, a protection spell, a lie. From the stairwell beyond the apartment, a new sound. Something heavy being dragged upward, step by step. Not dragged, carried or drifting, or arriving in some way that didn't match normal movement. With it came the rhythmic creak of oarlocks, metal in wood, pulling and releasing. The sound matched their heartbeat exactly, as if something outside were measuring time by the pulse in their chest. Alex went to the window and looked out. The storm had stopped, but the street was wrong. The parked cars looked elongated, stretched into vertical posts like pilings driven into a riverbed. The crosswalk's white stripes gleamed wetly, parallel and even, a gangplank. The whole block had lost its depth and substance, everything compressed and flattened into something that belonged on water, not land. Between buildings, where alleys should be, there was only darkness, the kind of darkness that suggested vast open space, empty water extending forever. A bell sounded, once, far off, then again, closer. A ship's bell or a buoy, deep and resonant. Alex pressed both palms against the window and felt the glass humming with it. The coin on the desk spun once, fast, then stopped with the profile pointing at the door. This, time when it stopped, condensation bloomed not just around it but across the entire desk surface, spreading outward in rings that overlapped and merged into a single dark stain. The papers beneath were soaked now, ink bleeding, words running together into illegibility. Alex's phone lit up on its own. No call, no notification, just the screen glowing, showing the lock screen photo. Their father, years ago, before the sickness, holding up a fish by the river and grinning. They'd taken that photo. They'd been there. And now they weren't, hadn't been, refused to be for reasons that felt both overwhelming and impossibly small. The apartment door shuddered in its frame, once, twice. Not from wind, from something pressing against it from the other side, testing. The peephole showed nothing but passing dockboards and that slow lantern light. The wake had returned to the hallway runner, sliding back and forth now, a tide marking time. Alex grabbed the coin, wrapping it in a napkin because touching it directly was impossible now. It glowed faintly orange with heat. They shoved it in their pocket and pulled on their jacket. The grandmother's rule came back complete and clear. Before dawn, nearest bridge, speak the name, pay the river. They didn't know if they believed it, but belief seemed less important than action, less important than the fact that their apartment had become something else, somewhere else, and the only way out was through. They opened the door. The hallway was still a hallway, but barely. The carpet squelched beneath their feet, though it looked dry. The walls seemed to curve inward, as if they were walking through a ship's passage rather than a residential corridor. The neighbour's wreath had transformed into a circle of rope, weathered and salt-stained. The elevator at the end of the hall chimed, but when the doors opened, there was only darkness inside and the faint sound of water lapping. Alex took the stairs instead, spiralling down through floors that seemed to multiply, each landing identical, each smelling more strongly of river water. By the time they reached the ground floor and pushed through the lobby door, they were breathing hard, chest tight with something between panic and grief. Outside, the rain had returned, but different now, soft, needle-thin, carrying that river smell. The sidewalk tilted imperceptibly downward, a grade that shouldn't exist leading toward the bridge 6 blocks east. Storm drains along the curb gurgled and rushed with more water than rain could account for, the sound of current over stone. Alex started walking. With each block, the city transformed further. Streetlights became channel markers, their amber glow reflecting off pavement that looked more like moving water the longer they stared. Parked cars were definitely pilings now, vertical and barnacled in patches that shouldn't exist. The few people they passed were grey and distant, like figures seen from a boat, standing on a receding shore. The coin in their pocket pulsed with heat in rhythm with their steps. Alex's mind raced with justifications, with the story they'd been telling themselves for weeks. I'm busy, I don't know what to say, it's too hard. Seeing him like that would break something in me. I'm protecting myself. I need more time. Tomorrow I'll be ready. Tomorrow I'll know the words. Tomorrow will be easier. With each justification, each dodge, the streetlights rippled and the river smell grew stronger. But when their thoughts turned honest, I'm scared. I don't want to watch him die. I'm avoiding it because I'm a coward. I owe him better than this. The light steadied, just a little, and the pavement felt more solid beneath their feet. The bridge appeared through the rain, spanning dark water that Alex knew intellectually was the city river, but which looked in this moment like something much older, much wider, flowing from and to places not marked on any map. The bridge was empty except for a single figure at the far end, too distant and shadowed to make out clearly. They stood motionless, and Alex had the distinct impression of someone waiting, patient and eternal. Alex walked to the bridge's centre point and stopped. The rail was cold iron, real and solid, and they gripped it with both hands. Below, the water moved in slow coils, black and seamless. Somewhere beneath its surface they thought they could see a shape, a long boat, narrow and old, drifting parallel to the bridge. An oar lifted from the water, dripping and laid down again. The sound echoed up, wood on water, the most ancient rhythm. They pulled the coin from their pocket, unwrapping the napkin. It sat in their palm, burning, the profile facing upward. That stamped face looked different now. Not the standard presidential portrait, but something older, more archetypal. A ferryman, a guide, a keeper of passages. Alex's throat tightened. They opened their mouth and nothing came out at first. Just breath. Just rain. Just the small sounds of someone trying to break through years of practiced silence. Then, finally words. His name is Richard. The name hung in the air, strange and intimate. Richard. My father. He's dying and I haven't gone to see him because I don't know how to say goodbye to someone who's already halfway gone. I'm scared of the hospice smell. I'm scared of tubes and monitors. I'm scared he won't recognise me, or worse, that he will, and I'll see disappointment. I'm scared I'll say the wrong thing or nothing at all. I'm scared of the last time, of it being the last time, of having to carry that forever. Their voice broke. The coin burned hotter, almost unbearable, but they didn't drop it. I've been letting his calls go to voicemail. I've been telling my sister tomorrow. I've been pretending there's still time when maybe there isn't. And I don't know if this... They gestured at the bridge, the river, the impossible night. Is real, or if I'm losing my mind, but either way, I need it to. Stop. I need to go. I need to be able to go. They held the coin out over the water. I'm asking for passage, not across some mythic river, just past this thing in my chest that keeps locking up, past the fear, to wherever he is before it's too late, if it's not already too late. I'll pay whatever the cost is. The coin had become so hot it was singing their skin, but they held it a moment longer. Then they let go. It fell in a slow arc, spinning, catching what little light existed. When it hit the iron rail on the way down, it rang once, a pure, clear note that carried across the water. Then it struck the surface with a small, final chime and disappeared beneath the black. For a long moment, nothing. Just Alex gripping the rail, breathing hard, rain on their face. Then the water below began to change. The restless movement stilled. The coils smoothed and flattened until the surface was nearly glass. The shape they'd glimpsed, the boat, the ferry, became clearer for just an instant. A long, narrow vessel, empty except for a single figure at the stern, one hand on an oar. The figure nodded once, just the slightest tilt of the head, and pushed off. The oar lifted and laid down one last stroke, pulling the ferry away into darkness, the sound receding until it was indistinguishable from the rain. The streetlight steadied. The pavement solidified. The storm drains no longer sounded like rivers but just like drains, doing their ordinary work. Alex looked down at their palm where the coin had burned it. There was a faint red circle, already fading, and nothing more. They turned from the rail and walked back across the bridge. The figure at the far end was gone, if they'd ever really been there. The city reasserted itself with every step. Cars were cars again. Buildings were properly vertical. The distance between things made sense. By the time they reached their block, dawn was greying the sky, turning everything soft and uncertain. Inside the apartment, everything was exactly as they'd left it, and completely different. The hallway was just a hallway. Carpet dry, walls straight, the neighbour's wreath perfectly ordinary. The elevator chimed and sounded like an elevator. Their door opened without resistance onto a space that smelled only of tea and rain blown in through a window they'd forgotten to close. Alex closed the window, hung up their wet jacket and stood in the middle of the living room as the morning slowly brightened. The desk was dry. No condensation, no water damage. The papers were crisp and clean. The coin was gone. They picked up their phone. 5 missed calls, 7 texts, 3 voicemails, all from numbers they recognised. They made tea first, hands shaking just enough to make the kettle rattle. Then they sat on the couch, phone in hand, and pulled up their sister's contact. Their thumb hovered over the call button. All the old fears were still there. The hospice smell, the tubes, the wrong words, the last time, but they felt manageable now, properly sized. Fears instead of walls. They pressed call. Their sister answered on the second ring. "Alex? Oh my God, Alex!" Her voice was thick with exhaustion and relief. "I'm coming," Alex said. "Today. This morning. I'm coming now." There was a long silence then. "He's still here. He's been asking for you." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll be there in an hour." They hung up and sat for a moment longer, letting the reality of it settle. Then they grabbed their keys and headed out. The hospice was across town, 20 minutes by train, 10 by cab. Alex took the train, needing the time, needing to watch the city pass by the windows, and prove to themselves it was solid again, real, navigable. The river flowed beneath the bridge they crossed, ordinary and brown, carrying nothing but city runoff and the occasional commuter ferry. Riverside Hospice was a low brick building trying to look cheerful, with window boxes and a bright blue awning. Inside, it smelled exactly as Alex had feared. Disinfectant and flowers, air conditioning and something underneath, something biological and unavoidable. They gave their name at the desk and followed the directions down a hall that was too bright and too quiet. Room 237. The door was half open. Alex stood outside it for a full minute, counting breaths, counting heartbeats, remembering the sound of an oar on water. Then they knocked softly and stepped inside. Their father was smaller than they remembered, diminished in the mechanical bed, but his eyes were open and clear. When he saw Alex, something shifted in his face. Surprise, then relief, then a complicated joy that had sadness woven through it. "Hey, Dad." "You came." His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. "I came. I'm sorry it took so long." He moved one hand, a small gesture that said it was okay, that he understood, that they were here now, and that's what mattered. Alex pulled a chair close and sat, taking that hand carefully, aware of its fragility and warmth. They talked. Not about anything profound at first, just small things, memories, a story about the bodega and the storm, the state of the apartment, the way the city looked from the train. Their father listened, occasionally interjecting, occasionally drifting. When the silences came, they were bearable. When Alex didn't know what to say, they said that, and it was enough. After an hour, their sister arrived with coffee and sandwiches. After 2 hours, a nurse came in to check vitals. After 3, their father drifted into sleep and didn't wake, and Alex sat watching him breathe in and out, like water against a hull. He died 4 days later, with Alex and their sister both present. The goodbye wasn't perfect. There were things left unsaid, questions left unanswered, a lifetime of complications that no final conversation could untangle. But Alex had been there, had shown up, had spoken their father's name and said what needed saying, imperfect and stumbling and true. The weeks after were hard in expected ways and surprising ones. Paperwork and memories and belongings that needed sorting. Moments when the grief arrived like a wave and others when they couldn't feel anything at all. But Alex navigated it, showed up for it, called their sister when they needed to instead of letting it ring. One morning, several weeks later, Alex was at their desk with coffee when they noticed condensation forming around the mug, a perfect ring spreading across the paper underneath. Their chest tightened immediately, that old fear rising. But this time they recognized it. Avoidance. Their sister had been calling about their father's belongings, about what to keep and what to let go. And Alex had been putting off the conversation because it felt too final, too much. They picked up the phone and called. "Hey," their sister said. "I was starting to think you'd gone underground again." "I know, sorry, this is hard." "Yeah. Let's figure out the stuff. What do you want to keep?" They talked for 40 minutes, making decisions that felt impossible and necessary. When they hung up, the condensation ring around the coffee mug had faded to almost nothing, disappearing as Alex watched. After that, it happened a few more times, not often. Just when avoidance started building again, when Alex began constructing tomorrow out of all the things they should do today. A ring of condensation would appear, on a glass, on a table, once on the bathroom mirror, and Alex would recognize it for what it was. A reminder, a warning, a small mercy. They'd stop, make the call, say the difficult thing, go to the place they'd been avoiding, do the goodbye they'd been postponing. And the condensation would fade, and the apartment would stay just an apartment, and the river would remain outside where it belonged. The coin itself was gone, paid and accepted and carried away to wherever such payments go. But the habit of paying remained, the knowledge that ferries dock for those who dodge goodbyes, and that the price of passage is simpler and kinder than it seems. Just name it, speak it, show up before dawn comes and claims whatever moment you thought you could hold on to forever. Sometimes, late at night, when rain needled the windows and the city blurred into neon and wet glass, Alex would stand at the window and look out at the streetlights. They held steady now, amber and solid, marking real streets in a real city. But somewhere beyond the farthest light, beyond where the buildings gave way to water, they thought they could still hear it sometimes. An oar lifting and laying down, once, twice, measuring time in the oldest rhythm. Not a threat. Just a reminder of the deal they'd made, the coin they'd paid, and the door they'd learned to walk through before it became too late to walk through at all. The radiator in the hall ticked quietly, heating the building against the autumn cold. It was just a radiator, doing radiator things, unless they started. Dodging again, started letting calls ring out and tomorrow pile up into never. Then it might become something else, a knock, a lap of water, a breath beneath the door, and they'd know where to go. To the bridge, to the rail, to the water that carries away what we owe and brings us, if we're lucky and brave enough to pay, back to the shore where goodbyes wait patient as ferrymen, inevitable as rivers, kind as the coin that warms in your pocket before you learn what it's asking you to give. The autumn turned to winter, and the city wrapped itself in the early darkness. Alex learned to read the signs. Not just the condensation rings, but smaller things. The way certain silences felt heavier than others, the quality of light through the window when they were procrastinating on something that mattered, the particular tightness in their chest that meant they were building walls again instead of walking through doors. Their sister called one evening in December. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice careful in that way that meant she'd rehearsed this, "about having people over for the holidays, his friends, the ones who came to the service. I think Dad would have wanted that, but I don't know if I can do it alone." Alex's first instinct was the old one. "Tomorrow, maybe. Let me think about it. I'll let you know." The words were right there, ready. But then they noticed their water glass on the coffee table had gone cold, and around its base a thin line of moisture was beginning to form. They watched it spread just slightly, a ring that caught the lamplight. "Yes," they said instead, the word coming out before they could stop it. "Yes, let's do it. I'll help." "Really? Really? When were you thinking?" The condensation stopped spreading. By the time they hung up 20 minutes later, having made actual plans with actual dates, the ring had disappeared entirely. The gathering happened 2 weeks later in their father's old house, which their sister hadn't been able to bring herself to sell yet. Alex arrived early to help set up, and the moment they walked through the door they were ambushed by memory. The smell of the place, wood polish and old books and something underneath that was just their father, his particular scent that had soaked into the walls over decades. They stood in the entryway, grocery bags in hand, breathing it in and feeling the grief arrive fresh, as if it had just been waiting here for them to come back. "You okay?" their sister asked from the kitchen. "No," Alex said, and was surprised by how easy the word came. "But I'm here." They worked together through the afternoon, putting out food, arranging chairs, arguing about music the way they used to argue about everything when they were younger. People arrived as the sun set. Their father's fishing buddies, colleagues from the university where he'd taught, neighbours from 30 years back who'd made the drive. The house filled with voices and stories, and Alex moved through it all, feeling simultaneously present and distant, connected and adrift. An older man with a weathered face cornered them by the bookshelf. "Your father talked about you all the time," he said. "Even at the end, especially at the end. He was so proud when you finally came to see him." Alex's throat closed. "I should have come sooner. Maybe, but you came." That's what he told everyone. "My kid came." Like it was the most important thing in the world. The man clapped them on the shoulder. "Don't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for being human." After he walked away, Alex stood alone looking at their father's books, running their fingers along the spines. So many of them were about rivers, about fishing, about water. Their father had loved the river, had taken them there as a child, teaching them to cast, to read the current, to understand the patience required to wait for something to bite. Alex had stopped going with him in their teens, trading those trips for friends and screens and the ordinary self-absorption of growing up. Another small goodbye they dodged year after year, until there were no more years to dodge with. The glass of wine in their hand trembled, and when they looked down, condensation was crawling up its surface in tiny beads. Not a ring this time, but a slow coating, like frost spreading across a window. Alex set it down on a coaster and pulled out their phone, scrolled through contacts to a name they hadn't called in months. Jamie, their ex. The breakup had been mutual and quiet, but there had been no real goodbye, just a trailing off, a "we should get coffee sometime" that both of them knew meant never. They typed out a message. "I know it's been a while. I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I don't think I ever said what I needed to say. Could we talk sometime? Actual talk, not coffee as euphemism." Sent it before they could reconsider. The condensation on the wine glass stopped spreading. Jamie replied an hour later. "Yeah, I'd like that. How's next week?" The party went late. People told stories about their father that Alex had never heard, his terrible jokes, his kindness to struggling students, the time he'd rescued a dog from the river and kept it for a week before finding its owner. Each story was a small piece of a person Alex had known completely and not at all. The way you can know a parent as a child but never fully understand them as a whole human being. After everyone left and they were cleaning up, their sister said, "This was good. Hard but good." "Yeah." Alex was elbow deep in dishwater watching soap bubbles catch the light. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." Do you ever feel like you're being watched? Not by a person, but by something that's keeping track. Their sister dried a plate in slow circles, thinking, "You mean like guilt?" Sort of, but more specific. Like the world itself is noticing when you avoid things, when you dodge. Since Dad died? Since before? Their sister set down the plate and looked at them. Really looked, the way she used to when they were kids, and she was trying to figure out if they were lying about breaking something. "You've been different," she finally said, "since that last week before he died, like you went somewhere and came back changed." Alex wanted to tell her about the coin, the ferry, the river that had filled their apartment building and turned their city into something else. But how do you explain that? How do you say you paid a ferryman with a hot quarter, and he took your fear in exchange, or at least made it manageable? So instead they said, "I learned I can't keep putting things off, that tomorrow isn't promised and avoidance has a price." That's very grown up of you. I'm trying. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. On the drive home, Alex's phone buzzed with a message from an old friend they'd been meaning to reach out to for months. Before they could talk themselves out of it, they pulled over and called. The conversation was awkward at first, both of them apologising for the silence, but by the end they'd made plans to meet up after the new year. No condensation appeared anywhere in the car. Winter deepened. The city froze and thawed and froze again. Alex went back to work after the bereavement leave ended, and the normal routines tried to reassert themselves, but something had shifted fundamentally. They couldn't slip back into old patterns without noticing them now, couldn't avoid a difficult conversation without feeling that particular quality of air that preceded the warning signs. One morning in January, their supervisor called them into her office. "I need to talk to you about the Reynolds project," she said, and Alex's stomach dropped because they'd been procrastinating on the report for 2 weeks, finding increasingly creative reasons to work on literally anything else. "I know," Alex said before she could continue. "I've been avoiding it. The client makes me anxious and I convinced myself I needed more data, but really I just didn't want to deal with the confrontation about the budget overruns." Their supervisor blinked, clearly surprised by the honesty. "Okay, well, that's unusually self-aware. I'm working on it. I'll have the report to you by end of day. Actually, I was going to suggest we handle the client together. They make everyone anxious. You're not alone in that." The relief was immediate and physical. Alex left the office and went straight to their desk, pulled up the half-finished report and worked through lunch to complete it. By 3 o'clock it was done. Not perfect, but honest and thorough. They sent it off and sat back, noticing that the water bottle on their desk, which had been sweating condensation all morning, was now dry. The meeting with the Reynolds client happened the following week, and was exactly as uncomfortable as Alex had feared, but their supervisor handled the budget conversation deftly, and Alex contributed what they could. Afterward, in the elevator, their supervisor said, "You did good work on that report. Whatever's been going on with you lately, keep doing it." "I'm just trying to show up," Alex said. "Most people don't even manage that." That evening, walking home from the subway, Alex passed the bodega where all of this had started. The same clerk was behind the counter, still scrolling on his phone. Alex went in, not needing anything, just curious. They bought a coffee and paid with exact change, watching the coins pass from their palm to the clerk's without incident. All of them were cool, ordinary, exactly what change was supposed to be. Outside, they stood on the corner where they'd pocketed the hot quarter and looked up at their building 3 blocks away. The streetlights were steady. The sidewalk was just a sidewalk. There was no river smell, no sense of water where water shouldn't be. Just a cold January evening in the city, traffic and neon, and the smell of roasting nuts from a vendor's cart. Alex walked the 3 blocks slowly, finishing their coffee, and realised they were happy. Not ecstatic, not without grief or worry or the low hum of anxiety that was just part of being alive. But happy in a baseline way, the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to do, not running from anything in particular. They met Jamie the following week at a quiet restaurant neither of them had been to before, Neutral Ground. The conversation was halting at first, both of them apologising too much, explaining too much, trying too hard. But eventually they found a rhythm. Alex talked about their father, about learning to face things they'd been avoiding. Jamie talked about therapy, about patterns they were trying to break. Neither of them wanted to get back together, and saying that out loud was a relief to both of them. "I think I needed to know you were okay," Alex said near the end of the meal, "and to tell you that I'm sorry for how I handled things. I went quiet when I should have spoken up." "I did the same thing," Jamie said. "We were both pretty good at dodging." "I'm trying to be worse at it," Jamie smiled. "How's that going?" "It's terrifying and exhausting, and I think it might be working." They split the check and hugged goodbye outside the restaurant, and it felt like an actual goodbye this time, a closing of something that had been left open. Walking to the subway, Alex checked their phone and found a message from their sister. "Going through more of Dad's things this weekend if you want to help. No pressure." 2 months ago, Alex would have made an excuse. Would have said they were busy, they'd help next time, they needed a break from all the grief work. But they could feel it already. That slight heaviness in the air, that sense of something paying attention. So they typed back, "I'll be there. What time?" The weekend was hard. Their father's closet still smelled like him. His handwriting on old notebooks was a punch to the chest. They found a box of fishing lures and both of them cried, remembering different trips, different moments on the water. But they worked through it together, making decisions, telling stories, letting the grief move through them instead of damming it up. In the bottom of the bedroom closet, Alex found something that made them stop. A photo album they'd never seen before. Inside were pictures from their childhood, pictures of them and their father on fishing trips Alex had half forgotten. There they were at 7, holding up a tiny sunfish. At 12, soaked and laughing after falling in the shallows. At 15, sullen and present but clearly wishing to be anywhere else. The last photo in the album was from much more recently, 5 years ago maybe. They were visiting for a holiday and someone had caught them and their father in the kitchen, both reaching for the same dish, both laughing at the timing. Alex didn't remember the moment, but there it was. Evidence of connection, of presence, of showing up even when it was easier not to. "He kept this by his bed," their sister said quietly, looking over their shoulder. "At the hospice. The nurses told me he looked at it every day." Alex closed the album carefully and held it against their chest. "Can I keep this?" "I think he'd want you to." They brought it home and put it on their own bedside table. Some nights they looked through it before sleeping, letting themselves remember, letting themselves feel both the loss and the gratitude that came before the loss. And on the nights when they felt the old avoidance creeping back, the temptation to ghost on plans, to leave a text unanswered, to put off until tomorrow what should be handled today, they'd look at those photos and remember what they'd learned. February brought a cold snap that froze the river solid for the first time in years. Alex stood on the bridge one morning before work, the same bridge where they'd dropped the coin, and looked down at the ice. People were walking on it, careful and delighted, treating it like the novelty it was. The surface was white and opaque, nothing like the black water that had been there that storm-soaked night. But Alex could still feel it underneath, the current, the depth, the ferry drifting in the dark. Not as a threat, but as a presence, a fact of the world. The river was always there, frozen or not, and the ferryman was always waiting for those who needed passage. All you had to do was name what you owed, speak what you'd been avoiding, and pay the price of showing up. A jogger passed behind them, breath fogging in the cold. Car horns sounded from the traffic building up at the bridge's far end. The city woke up around them, ordinary and miraculous, full of people dodging their own goodbyes, and others learning to say them. Alex pulled their collar up against the wind and started walking to work, feeling the weight of the photo, album in their bag, the contact list in their phone full of names that deserved more than silence. That evening they called an old mentor they'd been meaning to thank for years but never had. The conversation lasted an hour and ended with the mentor saying, "I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about you. I should have called sooner. You called now. That's what matters." After they hung up, Alex noticed their apartment felt different. Warmer somehow, more solid, more theirs. The radiator ticked peacefully. The streetlights outside held steady. There was no smell of river water, no phantom wake sliding across the floor. Just an ordinary evening in an ordinary apartment, made extraordinary by the simple fact of being present in it, of not running from it, of staying. They made dinner and ate slowly, tasting everything, washed the dishes and put them away, sat on the couch with a photo album and a cup of tea and let themselves exist in the space between what had been and what was still to come. The coin was gone, paid and spent and carried away on dark water, but its warmth remained somehow, a reminder that burned in their pocket even though nothing was there. Outside, the city continued its endless movement. People coming home, people leaving, people making choices about what to face and what to avoid. And somewhere beyond the farthest streetlight, beyond where the buildings gave way to frozen river and the ice held winter still, an oar lifted and laid down in ancient rhythm, patient as water, inevitable as goodbye, waiting for the next person who would need to learn what Alex had learned, that the price of passage is just honesty, that the toll for crossing is just presence, and that the ferryman asks for nothing more than your willingness to name what you owe before the dawn comes and claims it anyway. The phone buzzed, a message from their sister. "Thank you for this weekend. I couldn't have done it alone." Alex typed back, "Neither could I. Same time next month?" "Yes." They set the phone down and looked at their reflection in the darkened window. Tired, older, marked by loss but not destroyed by it. Behind their reflection, the city lights held steady and true, marking real streets in a real world where rivers ran both above ground and below, where ferries docked for those who needed them, and where the coin you paid for passage was never really gone but transformed into something else. The habit of showing up, the practice of presence, the small daily choice to walk through doors before they closed forever. The tea had gone cold. Around the bottom of the cup, no condensation formed. Alex smiled, finished it anyway, and got ready for tomorrow. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The storm came down in sheets that turned the city into a smeared watercolour. Every streetlight below stretched into long amber trails against the glass. Ari's desk on the 37th floor sat in a pool of blue monitor glow, the only occupied workspace in a sea of dark cubicles. The report was due at 8 a.m, and it was already past midnight. Outside, thunder rolled through the downtown canyon, a sound like furniture being dragged across the sky's attic. The fire drill chimes began softly, almost apologetic, a three-note melody that seemed embarrassed to interrupt the storm's percussion. Then they grew insistent, steady, filling the empty office with their polite urgency. Ari looked up from the spreadsheet, fingers still on the keyboard, and watched as the red exit signs along the far wall hummed to life, their glow intensifying from dim standby to full alert. The overhead fluorescence that had been cycling down for the night snapped back on in sections, harsh and institutional. A crackle from the ceiling speaker, then a voice wrapped in static. "Attention all personnel. This is a mandatory evacuation drill. All non-essential personnel proceed to the nearest stairwell. Do not use elevators. Repeat, do not use elevators." Ari sat back, rubbing eyes that felt full of sand. "It's nothing," they muttered to the empty floor, fingers already reaching to save the document. Just another drill. The building ran them quarterly, always at the worst possible times, as if inconvenience was part of the test. They grabbed the hoodie draped over their chair back, shrugged into it, and headed toward the red glow of Stairwell C. The office door whooshed shut behind them with a pneumatic sigh. The hallway was different at night, longer somehow, the geometric carpet pattern stretching toward a vanishing point that seemed farther away than it should be. The exit sign above the stairwell door pulsed with each alarm chime, synchronized, casting red shadows that made the walls look like they were breathing. Ari pushed through the door into concrete quiet. The stairwell was a different world, a vertical shaft of poured concrete and painted steel where sound behaved strangely. The alarm chimes were muffled here, distant, as if filtering through water. The air had that particular coolness of spaces meant only for transit, never for lingering, the smell of old paint and metal, and something else, something like the inside of a closed closet. Emergency lights in wire cages threw harsh shadows that turned the handrails into bars of darkness against pale walls. On the first landing, the red exit sign glowed steady above the door marked 36. The arrow beneath it pointed down and right, precise, authoritative. Ari's footsteps echoed in the empty column, each step a small percussion that travelled up and down the shaft, multiplying. Somewhere far below, maybe 10 floors down, maybe 20, HVAC machinery hummed like the building's slow heartbeat. The second landing. floor 35. The exit sign flickered. Just once, barely noticeable, a split-second dimming that could have been a trick of tired eyes. Harry's hand on the cold handrail descending, the rhythm of stairs becoming automatic. In the corner where the landing turned, something dark that might have been a shadow, might have been nothing. The third landing, floor 34. The exit sign over the door sputtered, buzzed and died. Harry stopped mid-step, one hand still on the rail. The sign was completely dark, not even the faint glow of a dying bulb. The emergency lighting in the stairwell suddenly seemed dimmer, as if the dead sign had somehow pulled brightness from the air itself. And in the corner of the landing, in that space where the wall met the ceiling and shadows naturally pooled, something moved. Not moved, unfurled. Harry's peripheral vision caught it first. A tall shadow, taller than any person should be, with two vast shapes spreading from its back like curtains opening to reveal a stage of deeper darkness. Wings. The word arrived in Harry's mind unbidden, certain. Wings that seemed to absorb the emergency lighting, wings that made the space where they existed feel hollow, vacant, as if they occupied negative space instead of positive. Where the painted red arrow on the wall should have been visible beneath the dead sign, there was only wing shadow, blotting it completely. Harry's breath caught. They turned their head to look directly at the corner. Nothing, just concrete and the meeting of two walls and the normal shadows of an angular space. Empty. But when Harry's gaze drifted even slightly, there it was again in the periphery. The tall shape, the wings, the sense of something vast folded into a small space, watching without eyes that could be seen. From far below, 30 floors down or more, the building's security radio crackled in someone else's hand, the sound rising through the stairwell shaft like something living. All personnel, remain calm and proceed to ground level. Use caution on stairs. Harry's heart hammered against their ribs. The logical part of their brain, the part that filed reports and met deadlines, started cataloguing explanations. Fatigue, eye strain, the storm's atmospheric pressure playing tricks on the inner ear, the way emergency lighting always made shadows weird. "It's nothing," Harry whispered to the empty stairwell, to themselves, to the shape they weren't quite seeing. "Just tired." The words left their mouth and seemed to hang in the cool air. And in the moment after speaking them, after that denial, something changed. The stairwell felt longer. The distance to the next landing seemed to have stretched, as if an accordion had been pulled open between floors. And the exit sign on floor 33, which should have been glowing, went dark with a soft electrical pop. Harry stood frozen, hand still on the rail. The office folklore came back all at once. The stories traded during lunch breaks and around the coffee maker. The urban legends that every building seemed to accumulate like dust in its corners. The Mothman in the stairwells. The figure with wings who appeared before disasters, before fires and collapses and electrical failures, not to attack, but to test, to force acknowledgement, to make people admit when something was wrong. Someone in accounting had told it like a ghost story. He erases the exit signs. Every time you say it's nothing, every time you minimize what's happening, another sign goes dark, and you have to walk farther, and the stairwell gets longer, and if you never admit the danger, you walk until your legs give out. Someone else had added, but if you name it, if you say what's actually wrong, you find a way. Urban legend, office mythology, the kind of story people told to make boring buildings feel interesting, to add texture to the mundane geography of emergency routes and fire codes. Except the exit sign for floor 33 was dark, and Harry was sure, they were sure, it had been lit just moments ago. They chose down. The alternative was going back up, returning to the 37th floor, and the blue glow of an unfinished report, and that felt like failure, like giving in to something. Down was the way out. Down was where the ground waited with its rain and sirens and solid, sensible street level. Harry gripped the handrail and descended. The stair treads thrummed underfoot, vibrating with the building's systems, alarms 3 floors above, still chiming their patient warning, and somewhere below the deeper thrum of HVAC, the building's respiratory system pushing air through its concrete lungs. Floor 33. The door marked clearly, the paint around the number slightly chipped. Harry passed it. Floor 32, The handrail here with a familiar scuff mark from some long ago impact. Ari passed that too. Then floor 33 again. Ari stopped, hand on the rail, looking at the number stenciled on the door. The same chipped paint around the edges, the same scuff on the handrail in the exact same spot, a small impact mark shaped like a crescent moon. This wasn't a different floor with coincidental damage. This was the same landing. "It's just a loop," Ari whispered, the words barely audible even in the stairwell's acoustic amplification. A construction quirk, maybe. Bad signage. An error in the building's layout that nobody had ever bothered to fix, because who walked the stairs anyway? Everyone took elevators. The exit sign over door B, the alternate exit on the far side of the landing, sputtered once, twice, and went dark. The shadow on the landing swelled. It didn't move into the space so much as it expanded within it, as if the corner had always contained something enormous that was only now revealing its true dimensions. A man-tall silhouette, maybe 7 feet, maybe 8, with wings like blackout curtains, the edges of them feathered by the strobing emergency lights, in a way that made them seem to flutter, even while holding perfectly still. Where the wings existed, the concrete wall behind them disappeared, not hidden but erased, as if the wings occupied a space where matter couldn't persist. Ari's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to run, but run where? Up was a loop, down might be too. The nearest door was locked. They knew because during an actual emergency, stairwell doors only opened from inside the floors, not from the stairwell side. Fire code, safety measure, the thing that was supposed to save lives. "Nothing to worry about," Ari said, trying to make the words sound convincing, trying to reassemble the logical world through sheer force of repetition. "Just a system glitch. Just tired. Nothing is wrong." The floor number on the next landing down read 33. Again. And where there should have been a straight descent to floor 32, there was instead an extra half flight of stairs, appearing in a space that shouldn't exist, the steps just slightly misaligned with the ones above and below, as if they'd been spliced in from a different building with a different architect. From far below, the security radio crackled again, the voice tight. "Smoke reported near 24. Repeat, smoke reported near floor 24. All personnel use alternate routes." Ari's throat constricted. Smoke. The word sat heavy in their mind, but they couldn't seem to attach it to anything real. The air in the stairwell smelled like it always did. Paint and metal and closed-in coolness. No smoke, no evidence, just a radio report from somewhere far below. Probably a false alarm, probably someone's lunch burning in a microwave, probably nothing. They kept walking, jaw locked tight enough to make their teeth ache. The stairs descended in their strange geometry, some flights normal, some too long, some with that misaligned feeling like stepping into a dream's architecture. The shadows trailed behind like a second body, a tall shape that was always in the corner of vision, always accompanied by the soft sound of something moving. Not footsteps, but a quiet scritch like powder falling on concrete, or the sound of feathers dragging across stone. The stairwell grew too quiet between alarm cycles. The chimes would pulse, 3 notes, insistent, and then fall silent for long stretches. In those silences, there was only Ari's footsteps echoing up and down the shaft, and that soft scritch, and their own breathing that seemed too loud, too laboured for someone who was just walking stairs. Each landing presented its test. Ari would approach the door, hand reaching for the crash bar, and from straight on it would show only a metal slab with a narrow wire glass window, the hallway beyond dark. But when their gaze drifted, when they looked at anything else, the floor number, the handrail, their own feet, a wing would sweep across the corner of vision vast and silent, and the painted red arrow beneath the dead exit sign would be gone. Not covered. Gone. As if it had never been painted there at all. Heat began to twine down from above. Subtle at first, just a change in the air's temperature that could have been the building's HVAC adjusting. But it grew more noticeable with each floor, a warmth that seemed wrong for a concrete stairwell in the middle of a storm. And from below, something else, a smell, tarry and chemical, like burning plastic or rubber, faint enough that Ari couldn't be sure if it was real or imagined. Ari pulled out their phone, thumb swiping to the flashlight. The pale LED cone threw a beam down the stairs, harsh white light that should have pushed back the shadows. Instead, where the beam touched the wings, when they existed in peripheral vision, it seemed to be swallowed, absorbed, the light simply stopping at the wing's edge as if it had struck a wall of something that refused illumination. Through the wire glass slits in the stairwell doors, glimpses of the elevator lobbies on each floor, empty, lit by buzzing fluorescence, the geometric carpet extending to vanishing points. No people, no movement, just spaces waiting to be occupied, as empty as a stage before the actors arrive. Floor 29. Harry tried the handle, knowing it would be locked but trying anyway because doing something felt necessary. The handle didn't budge. Locked from the inside, just like all the others. "It's nothing," Harry breathed through clenched teeth, the words halfway between statement and prayer. "False alarm, system error, nothing is actually wrong." The stairwell doubled back on itself. It happened in the span of a blink, a shift in orientation that made Harry's inner ear scream warnings. The railing that had been on the left was now on the right. The landing that should have led straight down to floor 28 now turned in the opposite direction, and the distance between floors had grown, not by feet, but by the feeling of distance, the way a hallway looks longer in darkness than in light. The architecture had reorganised itself according to rules that had nothing to do with how buildings were constructed. The wing shape held position by the door to floor 29, tall enough that its head would have brushed the ceiling if it was solid, if it were a thing that existed in the normal way. Its head tilted, not quite looking at Harry but oriented toward them, attention focused like pressure. The eyes, if it had eyes, didn't glow. They absorbed. They made the space where they existed feel darker than darkness should be, like looking at holes in the world through which all light drained. It was asking a question. Harry knew this without words, without sound. The shape was asking, what is actually happening? What won't you say? Sweat cold on the back of Harry's neck, soaking into the hoodie, knees shaking hard enough that each step felt uncertain. Breath coming in short sips that didn't seem to bring enough oxygen. The heat from above was real now, undeniable, and the tarry smell was stronger, and somewhere between floors the air had changed character from cool and still to warm and moving, currents swirling through the stairwell, shaft like the building was breathing unevenly. The legend, the rule, the bargain that office folklore had encoded in a story. Name the danger, don't minimise it, say what's wrong out loud without apology or softening, speak the truth of what's happening and the way appears. Harry stopped on a dim landing, floor 28, or maybe still 29, or maybe a floor that had never had a number, and let the words form. It took effort, actual physical effort, as if the words were heavy objects that had to be lifted from somewhere deep in the chest and carried up the throat, and pushed past lips that wanted to press together and stay silent. Softly, barely more than a whisper, "I smell smoke." One of the dead exit signs, the one above the door, dark for the last several floors, began to glow. Not the bright red of full operation, but a dull ember colour, like the last coals in a dying fire. Just enough light to show the outline of the arrow, pointing down and right. The words felt like a lever that had moved something heavy inside the building's machinery. Harry took a breath, deeper this time, and continued, stronger now. "I'm scared. I'm alone. I don't know if floor 24 is safe." The extra half-flight of stairs, the one with the misaligned treads that had appeared like a splice in reality, contracted. The space reorganised itself, the geometry snapping back into something more normal, the railing returning to the correct side. The distance between landings felt proportional again, followable, like the building was remembering how to be a building instead of a maze. Harry's hand found the security radio clipped to their belt. They'd grabbed it from the charging station on their desk, more habit than intention, the way night workers carried radios in case of emergency. They'd forgotten it was there. Now they thumbed it on, hearing the crackle of open channel, the distant voices of security personnel calling floor numbers and status reports. Into the radio, voice steadier than they felt. "Security, this is Harry in stairwell C, somewhere between 29 and 28. I've been having problems, repeating floors, exit signs failing. The stairwell layout isn't right, and I smell smoke. Not strong, but it's there." A pause on the other end, static and breathing, then a voice. "Copy that. Stairwell C has a reported electrical surge. We've got a team checking it now. Can you make it to refuge floor 20? Yes, that's 8 floors down from you. I'll try, Ari said. The winged silhouette stepped aside. The movement was clear in peripheral vision, a folding of wings, a shift in position that opened space on the landing. Where it had been standing, blocking or guarding, or simply existing, the wall was now visible. And there, on the pale concrete, was the ghost of the painted arrow. Not a real arrow, the paint was gone, erased by wing shadow. But the memory of it, a slightly lighter patch on the concrete where paint had protected the surface from decades of dust and grime, the arrow's outline, barely visible, pointing down and right. Ari decided to follow the sign they could no longer see. It required a different kind of attention, a shift from the visual to the tactile. Hand to the cool wall on the arrow side of the landing, fingers trailing along concrete, feeling for the subtle differences in texture, where paint had been, where welds joined railings, where expansion joints created hairline gaps. Count the steps, 12 to a landing, then a turn, then 12 more. The building had a rhythm, a pattern, even when that pattern was hidden. Electrical rooms on even-numbered floors, always on the north side. Refuge floors at 20 and 10, designed as safe havens with separate ventilation. Heavier air pressure near mechanical spaces where fans pushed atmosphere through ductwork. Each time panic surged, and it surged often, in waves that made Ari's hands shake and their vision blur, they named it. Shortness of breath. Just air coming too fast, breathing too shallow, fixable by counting breaths, slowing down. Heat from above, acknowledging that yes, the air was warmer, that something on the upper floors was generating heat, that this was real and needed to be noticed. Door jam at 27. The door that wouldn't open even when it should. The handle that felt loose in its housing. The frame that had swollen or shifted. With every spoken truth, another exit lens flickered back. Not bright, never bright like they should be, but just enough. Dim red glows that marked the vertical route like breadcrumbs through darkness, like markers on a trail that only became visible when you admitted you were lost. The stairwell had stopped shifting its geometry. The floors descended in normal sequence. 28, 27, 26, 25. The shadows in the corners were just shadows now, ordinary darkness that behaved according to the rules of light and occlusion. The scritch sound had faded. The wings, when Ari glanced at the periphery, were gone. But the heat from above was growing stronger, and the smell was undeniable now, and somewhere in the upper reaches of Stairwell C, something was definitely burning. Floor 24 passed quickly, Ari's hand not even testing the door handle. The radio had said smoke near 24. The smart move was to keep going, get to the refuge floor, wait for the all clear, don't investigate, don't be curious, don't be the person in the horror movie who opens the door. Floor 23. The air was clearer here, cooler, the tarry smell fading. Floor 22. Ari's legs were shaking from exertion now, not fear. 37 floors down, and most of that in strange conditions. Adrenaline-fueled, muscles burning. Floor 21. One more. Floor 20. Refuge floor. The door to Refuge 20 gave with a groan of metal on metal, the hydraulic closer having lost its smooth action from disuse. Ari pushed through into a space that felt different from the stairwell, different from the office floors. This was a concrete bay, a room designed for survival, with walls thicker than structural necessity demanded and ventilation ducts larger than normal, colour-coded yellow. Industrial fans roared in ventilation shafts loud enough to make conversation difficult. Emergency kits were stacked against the far wall like tombs, each one wrapped in plastic and labelled with inventory contents. First aid, water, rations, blankets. A small window, wire-reinforced glass, looked back into Stairwell C through a different access point. Through it, Ari could see the stairs they'd just descended, could see the smoke that was drifting down from somewhere above, grey wisps that moved like living things, curling around railings and pooling on landings before dissipating or moving lower. Not thick smoke, not the kind that choked, but enough to confirm that yes, something was burning. Yes, the radio report had been real. And in the far corner of that window's view, up near the ceiling of a landing several floors above, a shape folded in the shadows, the wings, retreating upward, not downward, moving toward the source of the smoke, toward the danger, not away from it. Harry watched for a long moment, breath finally slowing, heart rate coming down. The shape moved with purpose, ascending the stairs with that same patient quality it had shown on the descent. Not hurried, not frantic, just present and moving. Going back up, going toward the fire or electrical surge or whatever was happening on floor 24, as if that was where it needed to be, as if the disaster was what called it. The legend said Mothman appeared before collapses and fires, but what if before was relative? What if he appeared when someone was denying the danger, when the disaster was already happening but going unacknowledged? A creature drawn to the gap between reality and what people were willing to admit, existing in that space until someone spoke the truth and closed the gap. Harry moved again. Down the stairs from the refuge floor, counting treads, hand on the rail. Each landing was named now, acknowledged. Clear air. Warmer on the left wall where the sun hits during the day. Air moving upward. Convection from lower floors. Exit sign dark, but the arrow spray painted on the wall by some past safety inspector points right. The descent became meditation, became a kind of conversation with the building. What's real? This is real. What do you feel? I feel heat here, cool there. What do you smell? Paint, concrete, rain coming through, ventilation from outside. What are you afraid of? Being trapped, being wrong, not getting out. And those fears, once named, became manageable. Not gone, but known, predictable. At level 1, the crash bar on the exit door was cold under Harry's palm, slick with condensation. The bar pressed down smoothly, the mechanism clicking, and the door swung open to let in the storm. Rain. Real. Living rain. Cold and clean, falling in sheets that turned the sidewalk into a moving river of reflected light. The air was so different from the stairwell that Harry gasped at the first breath, sharp, oxygenated, alive with ozone and the smell of wet asphalt. Sirens painted the street in blue and white strobes, emergency vehicles parked at angles across the intersection. A fire marshal in a yellow reflective vest was already waving people in ponchos across safety cones, guiding evacuees away from the building. Harry stumbled out, legs weak, hoodie soaked through in seconds. A paramedic approached with a blanket and a clipboard, asking questions in a calm, practiced voice. "Were you in the building? Which floor? Did you see smoke? Are you injured?" "I was on 37, Harry said. Words coming slowly, each one carefully selected for accuracy. "I came down stairwell C. There were problems, the floors were repeating, or I was disoriented, I'm not sure which. Exit signs were failing. I started smelling smoke around floor 28. The heat was coming from above, from the direction of 24. The marshal's radio crackled. A voice reported, "Electrical panel for stairwell C showed a surge at 12:17 a.m. Trash fire in the waste room on 24, started by a cigarette. Fire suppression activated. Smoke in the stairwell but contained. All clear for stairwell C." The marshal nodded, making notes. "You did good calling it in when you did. The electrical surge was messing with the emergency lighting, making some people disoriented. We got your radio report at 12:31. That's when we knew for sure about the smoke." Harry looked back through the glass door of the building's entrance, through the lobby to where stairwell C was visible beyond an interior window. The stairs rose into darkness, concrete and metal disappearing up into the building's height. For a heartbeat, a shadow moved on one of the upper landings, a tall shape, wings spreading wide like someone stretching after a long task. Then the shadow lifted, or dissipated, or simply moved beyond the range of the glass's view. And the exit sign at the top of the visible stairs, which had been dark or flickering throughout the entire descent, brightened to full red. Strong and steady and authoritative, the arrow beneath it glowing clear, pointing the way down. The building exhaled. The alarm cycled down to silence. The emergency lights in the lobby switched from their harsh white to the softer glow of normal operation. The storm continued to pour down, but it felt like permission now, not assault. The sky washing away the smoke smell, the electrical burn odour, the fear that had accumulated in concrete spaces. Harry stood under the marshal's umbrella and watched the building settle back into its normal state. Just a high-rise, just concrete and glass and steel organised into habitable space, just a place where people worked and filed reports and made coffee and complained about the weather. But they knew what was in the stairwells now. What existed in the gaps between floors, in the moments when someone said it's nothing, when it was definitely something, the shape that appeared when danger, went unacknowledged, that erased the exit signs until someone admitted the truth. The paramedic offered a bottle of water. Harry accepted it, drank half in one long swallow, and answered more questions for the incident report. Name, floor, time of entry to stairwell, time of exit, symptoms experienced. The questions were grounding, bureaucratic in the way that meant safety, that meant the disaster was over and now came the paperwork. They released Harry after 20 minutes, clearing them to go home to rest, to follow up with a doctor if any symptoms developed. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The emergency vehicles were already packing up, the trash fire on floor 24 being too minor to require extended response. A cleaning crew would handle the smoke damage in the morning. The electrical surge would be investigated by building maintenance. Everything would be documented and filed and eventually forgotten. Harry walked to the corner and called a rideshare, standing under the awning of a closed coffee shop, watching water drip from the edges and break into smaller droplets. The city looked different at this hour, after what had happened. Quieter, more honest, less willing to hide things. Or maybe Harry just saw it differently now. After that night, whenever Harry almost said it's nothing, when a colleague asked if they were okay, and the automatic dismissal started to form when they felt sick but considered pushing through, when something seemed off but not worth mentioning, the nearest exit flickered. Just a small dimming, barely noticeable, easy to dismiss as an electrical quirk. But if Harry paused, if they took a breath and said the truth instead, I'm tired. I feel dizzy. Something smells like burning. Whatever the actual reality was, the exit sign stayed lit. Steady and bright and clear, arrow pointing towards safety, showing the way out of whatever stairwell they were climbing, literal or metaphorical. They learned to pay attention to the flicker, to treat it as a reminder, a small gift from a shape with wings that existed in the spaces where truth got denied. The building's way of asking, what's real? What won't you say? What danger are you minimizing because it's easier than acknowledging? And Harry learned to answer honestly, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant admitting fear or uncertainty or need. Because the alternative was walking stairs that went nowhere, in a stairwell that grew longer with every denial, following signs that had gone dark because the truth had been left unspoken. The exit signs stayed bright after that. And on the rare nights when Harry worked late and had to take the stairs, they walked down in normal time, in normal space, counting floors that descended in sequence. The shadows in the corners were just shadows, the wings never appeared again, but they were there. Harry knew they were there, waiting in every building stairwell, in every emergency route, in every path towards safety. Waiting for the moment when someone said, it's nothing, when it wasn't nothing at all. Ready to erase the signs, to stretch the stairs, to ask the question that needed asking. And Harry knew the answer now, knew how to give it, knew that the way out was always lit for people who were willing to name what was real, who refused to minimize danger, who spoke truth even when their voice shook. The wings would fold aside for that truth. The arrow would appear, even if only as a ghost. The stairs would lead down to rain and sirens and solid ground. All you had to do was say it out loud. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The rain fell in soft, hesitant drops that evening, freckling the shrine grounds with dark coins of wet. Gravel paths that had crunched underfoot all afternoon now hushed beneath the steady drizzle, and the paper lanterns strung between wooden posts glowed honey-soft, their light diffused through dampening skin. Ray moved through the thinning crowd with an umbrella tilted against the mist, one hand clutching the curved handle, the other buried deep in their jacket pocket where the fox mask lay warm against their palm. It hadn't been stealing, not exactly. The vendor had been juggling 3 customers at once, each waving bills and pointing at different masks, and when Ray had held up the white kitsune face with its red-painted grin and black-tipped ears, the old woman had waved them on with a distracted nod. Ray had fumbled with their wallet, pulled out what they thought was enough, set it on the counter's edge where it might have fallen or might have been swept into the cash box, and then the crush of people had pushed them forward and away. By the time they'd looked back, someone else was already at the stall, and going back would mean squeezing through the crowd, explaining, making a scene. So they'd walked on, the mask growing heavier in their pocket with each step, telling themselves it was fine, it was handled, the vendor had waved them through. The festival music had thinned as the rain picked up. What had been a wall of sound, taiko drums, festival flutes, vendors calling out their wares, children shrieking with delight, had contracted to a distant heartbeat of percussion and the lonely thread of a shakuhachi somewhere beyond the main shrine. Most families had packed up early, hurrying toward covered walkways and the parking lot. Ray had stayed, unable to name exactly why, drifting between the remaining stalls where vendors were already covering their goods with plastic sheeting. They paused at a puddle that had collected in a dip in the stone path, and for just a moment glanced down at their reflection. The water's surface trembled with fresh drops, making their face waver and split. Then, as the ripples settled, they saw themselves clearly. Dark hair plastered to their forehead, the umbrella's arc framing their head, and their mouth set in a neutral line. They watched their reflection for a breath, 2 breaths, and then something made them look up. The lantern hanging directly above cast its glow across the puddle. In its paper skin, translucent and rain-spotted, a face smiled down. The same face. Their face. But where Ray's mouth had been carefully neutral, this one smiled, a beat too late, as if it had needed to remember how, and the smile was slightly too wide, stretching just past the boundaries of what felt natural. Ray blinked hard. When they looked again, the lantern was just a lantern, glowing steadily in the rain. They shook their head, scattering droplets from their hair, and walked on. But the mask in their pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, and somewhere in the back of their mind, a half-forgotten story began to surface. Their grandmother had told it years ago when Ray was small enough to believe in things that lived in the spaces between truth and lies. Kitsune loved festivals, she'd said, not for the celebration itself, but for what gathered there like morning dew. Small lies, polite untruths, 1,000 little deceptions people offered each other to keep things smooth. I'm having a wonderful time. This tastes delicious. No, please you first. Keep the change. Every lie, no matter how kind or how small, fed the foxes. Each one earned them another tale, and those tales appeared first in reflections, in puddles, in polished wood, in the paper skin of lanterns, in any surface that could hold an image and distort it just slightly. But there was a particular kind of lie the Kitsune prized above all others. The theft disguised as confusion. The taking dressed up as misunderstanding. If you pocketed something that belonged to the shrine, a coin, a wish written on paper, a mask meant for blessing, a fox would follow you home through every reflective surface, wearing your face and learning your shape, adding tales with each untruth you spoke until it knew you well enough to walk in your skin. The cure was simple. Return what you'd taken. Speak the apology you'd swallowed, the full version without the polite trimming. Say it out loud where the fox could hear, and it would release its claim. But the longer you waited, the more tales it grew, the harder it became to remember what the truth had even sounded like. Ray had dismissed the story years ago as the kind of thing grandmothers told to keep children honest. But now, with rain sliding down their neck and the mask warming their pocket, they felt the story settling back into their bones like an old ache. They stopped at another puddle, this one larger, spread across the path like a mirror, forced themselves to smile. Their reflection smiled back, and in the lantern's glow rippling across the water's surface, something smiled a fraction of a second after. Not quite synchronized, not quite right. Ray's phone buzzed. A text from Yuki. "Where are you? You okay? Everyone's heading out." Their thumbs moved automatically. "I'm fine. Be there soon." The moment they hit send, something changed. The air grew slightly heavier, or maybe it was just their imagination. But when they glanced at the puddle again, their reflection seemed to have gained something, a shimmer of light behind the shoulders, like the suggestion of a second tail catching the lantern glow. They stared, and the shimmer steadied into something more solid, a translucent brush of fur that moved independently of their body, swaying slightly in a wind that didn't exist. "It's nothing," Ray whispered to themselves, but even as they said it, they knew it was another lie. The tail in the reflection swished once, pleased. They walked faster now, weaving, between the few remaining festival goers. At the sweets booth, an elderly man was packing up his goods, but he smiled when he saw Ray approach and offered a piece of dorayaki, the red bean filling still warm. "Last one," he said. "On the house. Can't let good food go to waste. Ray took it with both hands, bowing. Thank you so much. They bit into it, the sweetness overwhelming, the texture dense and cloying. It was too much red bean, not enough pancake, the ratio all wrong, but the old man was watching with such hopeful expectation that Ray smiled and nodded. It's delicious, they said, and took another bite to prove it. The man beamed and turned back to his packing. Ray waited until his back was turned, then quickly wrapped the remaining half in a napkin and dropped it into a nearby waste bin, covering it with their napkin so it wouldn't be seen. When they glanced down at the puddle by the booth's corner, a third tail had joined the first two, this one fuller and more distinct, fanning out across the water like calligraphy. The rain intensified. Thunder rumbled somewhere over the mountains. The festival grounds were emptying fast now, families jogging toward the parking lot with children tucked under jackets and coats held overhead. Ray stood still in the centre of the path, umbrella tilted against the downpour, watching the lanterns sway on their strings. And that's when they noticed. Every lantern now bore two smiles, the painted ones that had always been there, and beneath them, slightly offset, a second grin that moved independently, tracking Ray's movement across the grounds. When Ray turned their head, the second smiles followed a heartbeat late, like reflections in disturbed water trying to catch up. Polite nods, they realised. Small shrugs. The mask warm in their pocket. Every untruth added something. At the information booth, a volunteer had asked if they were enjoying the festival. It's beautiful, Ray had said, even though they'd felt anxious all evening, even though the crowd had made their chest tight. In the polished window of the shrine office, they'd caught a glimpse of fox ears, translucent as smoke, perked up behind their head. Near the Ema boards, where people hung their wishes on wooden plaques, Ray had paused to read a few. A child's careful hiragana. I want to be brave. An adult's neat print. Please let the surgery go well. And their own, written earlier in the evening before any of this started. Help me learn to speak up. They'd meant it when they wrote it. But looking at it now, with shadows of fox paws visible beneath the board's overhang, it felt like a different kind of lie, asking for courage while actively choosing silence. The procession passed then, the final one of the evening. Priests in white and orange, a Mikoshi shrine carried on the shoulders of young men whose breath steamed in the cooling air, musicians playing the festival's last song. Ray stood aside to let them pass, and in the polished doors of the main shrine hall they caught their full reflection. 9 tails, 9 pale, translucent tails spreading behind them like a fan of light, each one distinct and moving with its own rhythm. But only in the reflection. When Ray turned to look at their actual shadow on the stone path, there was nothing, just their ordinary silhouette, solitary and small. The tails existed only in surfaces that could lie, that could show things as they weren't. The procession moved on, and the grounds fell into a wet hush broken only by the drum of rain on stone, and the distant echo of taiko fading toward the parking lot. Ray was alone now, truly alone, standing in the empty festival space with lanterns swaying overhead and water streaming down the shrine's curved roof. That's when they heard it. Footfalls just out of step with their own. A padding sound, soft as paws on wet stone, but with the occasional click of claws meeting rock. Ray spun, umbrella swinging, but saw only empty paths, steam rising from where rain hit the still warm food stalls, abandoned cups and napkins sodden in puddles. They walked toward the main shrine, each step careful, and the footfalls followed. Not echoing, that would have made sense, an acoustic trick of the covered walkways. No, these steps were syncopated, deliberately offset, as if something was walking beside them but choosing to place its feet a half second after Ray placed theirs. Step pad, step, click, step pad. At the Temasuya, the purification fountain where visitors cleansed their hands and mouths before approaching the shrine, Ray stopped. The basin was a polished granite bowl filled with rain-fed water, a bamboo ladle resting across its rim. In the water's surface, a question spelled itself out in ripples and light, the characters forming as raindrops disturbed the basin. Will you give it back? Ray's throat constricted. I'll pay tomorrow, they whispered. I'll come back and find the vendor and... The lantern nearest the basin flared, and in its light, Ray's reflection in the water changed. The face looking back was no longer entirely theirs. The eyes had narrowed to something vulpine, The smile had sharpened to show too many teeth, and the ears that rose from the sides of the head were pointed and tufted with black. The fox-faced version of themselves cocked its head, and the smile widened further, hungry and patient. Something touched Ray's calf, a wet sensation, like a brush being dragged across skin, but when they looked down, nothing was there. Just their legs in jeans, rain-darkened and shining. The touch came again, more insistent, circling their ankle, and this time they felt the distinct impression of fur and the scratch of claws that didn't quite break skin. Ray ran. They didn't decide to. Their body simply moved, feet slapping through puddles, umbrella forgotten and clattering on stone behind them. They ran past the dark food stalls and the empty stage where dancers had performed earlier, past the Emma boards, with their swaying wishes, past the stone foxes that guarded the inner shrine, and as they passed each statue they could have sworn the carved faces turned to track their movement, stone mouths quirking into knowing smiles. At the main torii gate, the great wooden portal that marked the boundary between sacred and mundane space, Ray finally stopped. Their breath came in gasps, and their shirt clung cold and wet to their skin. They turned back to look at the shrine grounds, and in every reflective surface, every puddle, every lacquered pillar, every lantern's paper skin, they saw the same thing. Themselves, but not themselves. The fox wearing their face, learning their expressions, practicing their gestures. It waved when they lifted their hand, but the wave was slightly wrong. The fingers bent at angles that shouldn't work, the smile too eager. The story came back in full now, every word of their grandmother's telling. The fox learns you through your lies. Each tale is a lesson, each untruth a piece of your pattern. 9 tails means it knows you fully, how you move, how you think, how you breathe. At 9 tails, the fox no longer follows through reflections. At 9 tails, it can slip into your skin and wear you like a coat, and no one will know the difference because it's learned to be you better than you are yourself. And maybe you won't know the difference either, because by the time it reaches 9 tails, you've lied so much you've forgotten what the truth of you even is. The mask in Ray's pocket burned now, hot enough to hurt. They pulled it out, and in the orange glow of the distant lanterns, the painted fox face seemed to shift, the red grin widening and narrowing as shadows moved across it. This was the anchor, they realised. This thing they'd taken. This theft dressed up as confusion. It was what tied the fox to them, what gave it permission to follow and learn and eventually replace, return it, speak the truth. The cure was simple, but Ray's feet felt rooted to the wet gravel. Because returning it meant admitting they'd taken it, meant going back to that stall, facing the vendor if she was still there, explaining that no, actually they hadn't paid, they'd pretended to pay and walked away, meant being the person who caused a scene, who made trouble, who wasn't easy and accommodating and fine with everything. The rain fell harder. Lightning flashed over the mountains, and in that white moment of illumination, Ray saw their shadow on the torii's wooden beam, and the shadow had 9 tails spread like dark flames against the ancient wood. They thought of Yuki's text, "You okay?" and their automatic response, "I'm fine." They were never fine. They spent most of their time managing other people's comfort, smoothing over awkward moments, pretending they didn't mind when plans changed or when they were interrupted or when someone took credit for their ideas. They said, "It's fine," so often that the words had worn smooth, meaningless, a reflexive sound that meant I'm choosing silence over truth because truth is too much trouble. And the fox had learned this, had studied each polite deflection, each swallowed complaint, each smile that covered hurt. It knew Ray better than Ray knew themselves because it had been paying attention to all the places where the real person disappeared behind the performance of not being any trouble at all. In the puddle at the torii's base, the fox-faced reflection smiled, and this time, when its mouth moved, Ray heard the whisper clearly in their own voice but with something else layered beneath. "Why fight it? I can be you. I can be the version that never struggles, that never feels the weight. You can rest, and I'll handle all the little lies. I'm good at them now. You taught me well." "No," Ray said aloud, and the word felt strange in their mouth, unfamiliar from disuse. They said it again, stronger. "No." The fox reflection tilted its head, curious. Ray remembered the rule, every word of it. Return what was taken. Speak the full apology, the The version without trimming or softening. Say it where the fox could hear. Say it to the person owed the truth. Say it in the spaces where the lie had been told. They turned and walked back into the shrine grounds. The rain had settled into a steady downpour, and the festival space looked abandoned now. Lanterns glowing in empty rows, stalls shuttered and dark. But Ray walked with purpose now, the mask clutched in both hands, no longer hidden in their pocket. They went to the fox statues first, the stone guardians that flanked the path to the inner shrine. Knelt in the puddle before them, rain streaming down their face and back. "I took something," they said to the carved faces. "The vendor waved me through and I let myself believe it was permission, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. I was embarrassed to go back, embarrassed to be the one who made things complicated, so I lied to myself about what happened, and then I lied to everyone else by saying nothing." In the nearest lantern, one of the tails in their reflection flickered and began to fade, losing coherence like mist in sun. Ray stood and walked to the mask stall. It was shuttered now, plastic sheeting covering the remaining merchandise, but the counter was still visible. They set the fox mask on its surface, placing it carefully in the centre, then pulled 2 coins from their pocket. More than the mask had cost, probably, but it didn't matter. They set the coins beside the mask and pressed their palms flat on the wet counter. "I took this without paying," they said to the empty stall. "I knew I was taking it. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, but I made the misunderstanding happen. I didn't want to be the person who held up the line, who made a fuss, who was difficult, so I took it and I walked away." 2 more tails faded from the lantern reflections, dissolving like sugar in water. But it wasn't enough. The hardest part remained. The apology to a person by name, acknowledging exactly what had been done and what it had cost them. Ray looked around the empty grounds, and in the distance near the shrine office, they saw a light still burning. Someone was there, perhaps closing up, perhaps doing final rounds, perhaps the vendor herself, or someone who could pass along the message. Ray walked toward the light, and with each step the sensation of being followed intensified. The padding footsteps came closer now, no longer offset but matching Ray's rhythm exactly. They didn't look at the reflections, didn't check the puddles, just kept walking with the mask held out before them like an offering. At the shrine office, a woman was indeed packing up. Not the mask vendor, but a younger volunteer in a festival happy coat. She looked up, surprised, when Ray appeared in the doorway, dripping and breathless. "I need to return something," Ray said, "and apologise." The woman listened as Ray explained, the words tumbling out now without polish or softening, the confusion at the stall, the walked-away payment, the mask in the pocket. The woman's expression shifted from surprise to understanding, and when Ray finished, she nodded slowly. "Mrs. Tanaka runs that stall," she said. "I can make sure she gets the mask and your payment. But you should tell her yourself too if you can. She'll be here tomorrow, setting up for the shrine's regular visiting hours. She's here most Sundays." "I'll come back," Ray promised. "Tomorrow. I'll find her and apologise properly. To her face. By name." The woman smiled, a real smile without any second layer. "That's brave of you. Most people wouldn't." Brave. The word their wish had asked for. Ray felt something shift in their chest, a pressure releasing. They left the office and walked back toward the torii, and this time when they looked at the puddles the reflection showed only 7 tails. Still too many, but diminishing. Because the real apology hadn't happened yet. Wouldn't happen until they faced Mrs. Tanaka in person, said her name, and acknowledged the specific harm of leaving her short. That was the piece that would cut deepest. Admitting they'd made things harder for someone else, because they'd prioritised their own comfort. At the Temisuya basin, Ray stopped and performed the purification ritual properly this time. Ladled water over their right hand, then their left, then rinsed their mouth and spit the water carefully to the side. In the basin's surface, the question had changed. "Will you finish it?" "Yes," Ray said. "Tomorrow, to her face. The whole truth without trimming." The fox reflection in the water watched them for a long moment, and then, slowly, deliberately, it nodded. Not a victory, not acceptance, but acknowledgement, an agreement. The bargain would hold if Ray held up their end. That night, Ray barely slept. They lay in bed with every reflective surface in their room covered, laptop screen closed, Mirror turned to the wall, phone face down, on the nightstand. But even in the darkness they could feel it. The weight of watching, the sense of something waiting. In the window glass, faint in the city light filtering through curtains, they could still see the shimmer of tails. When morning came, they dressed carefully. No hiding today, no slipping through unnoticed. They ate breakfast with their family, and when their mother asked if they'd enjoyed the festival, Ray paused before answering. The reflexive, "It was fine," rose to their lips, but they swallowed it. "It was complicated," they said instead. "I made a mistake and I need to fix it today." Their mother's eyebrows rose, but she didn't press, just nodded and poured more tea. The shrine grounds looked different in daylight without the rain. The gravel paths were pale and dry, the lanterns unlit, the stalls being set up by vendors preparing for Sunday visitors. Ray found the mask stall easily. It was in the same location, though the layout looked less magical without the festival press and evening glow. Mrs. Tanaka was there, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, arranging masks on their hooks with precise, practiced movements. She looked up when Ray approached, and her expression was neutral, waiting. "Mrs. Tanaka," Ray began, and their voice only shook a little. "Yesterday during the festival I took a fox mask from your stall. You were busy with other customers and you waved me forward and I put down money, but I don't think it was enough, and I didn't wait to make sure. I let myself believe it was sorted out when I knew it probably wasn't. I took the mask and I left. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I left you short, and I'm sorry I didn't come back right away to fix it, and I'm sorry I let my own embarrassment matter more than doing the right thing." The words came out in a rush, unpolished and graceless, but whole. The full truth, without trimming. Mrs. Tanaka listened with her head tilted slightly, and when Ray finished she was quiet for a long moment. "I wondered what happened to that one," she finally said. "I counted the masks at the end of the night and came up short, but there was so much confusion during the rush." She paused, then smiled, a small, complicated expression that held acknowledgement and forgiveness in equal measure. "Thank you for coming back, for telling me directly. That takes courage. I left the mask and extra payment at the shrine office last night," Ray added, "but I wanted to apologize to you, to your face, to say your name and own what I did." Mrs. Tanaka nodded slowly, and something in her expression shifted. A softness, a recognition. "The kitsune followed you home, didn't they?" she asked quietly. Ray startled. "You know about that?" "This is a shrine," Mrs. Tanaka said, "and I've run this stall for 30 years. I know all the stories. The foxes are particular about shrine goods. They take borrowed belief personally." She gestured to the masks around them, each, painted face grinning. "But you came back. You spoke the truth without softening it. That breaks the pattern." In the puddle at their feet, Ray caught a glimpse of their reflection. The tails were fading, flickering out one by one like candles being snuffed. 7, 6, 5, dissolving into light and mist. "Go to the Temazuya," Mrs. Tanaka said gently. "Cleanse your hands and mouth. Then go to the fox statues and thank them for the teaching. They don't punish, you know. They instruct. It hurts, but it's not meant as cruelty." Ray bowed deeply, holding it for several breaths, and when they straightened, Mrs. Tanaka was already turning back to her masks, the moment complete. At the Temazuya, Ray performed the purification with care. Right hand, left hand, mouth, the ladle held properly, the water spilling clear. In the basin's surface, their reflection showed only 3 tails now, faint as cobwebs. When they walked to the fox statues and knelt on the stones, pressing their palms to the cold granite, the tails faded to 2. "Thank you," Ray whispered to the carved faces, "for showing me what I was doing, for making it impossible to ignore." The final 2 tails flickered once, twice, and vanished. In the puddle beside the statues, Ray saw their reflection clearly. Just themselves. No extra smiles, no phantom ears or tails. Just a person, singular and solid, looking back with eyes that were tired but clear. The presence that had followed them, that padding footstep, that sense of being watched and measured, faded like morning fog in sun. The lanterns above, swaying slightly in the breeze, showed only their single painted grins. No doubled smiles, no lagging expressions. The world had returned to its proper state, where reflections matched reality without that haunting delay. Ray stood and walked back through the shrine grounds, and it felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if they'd been carrying weight they hadn't fully recognised until it was gone. At the Torii gate they paused and looked back. The shrine spread out behind them, peaceful in the late morning sun, and for the first time in longer than they could remember, Ray felt present in their own life rather than hovering somewhere above it, managing everyone else's comfort. They pulled out their phone and opened the message thread with Yuki, scrolled back to last night's text. "I'm fine. Be there soon." The lie sat there, preserved in the chat history, and Ray felt a familiar urge to leave it alone, to let it pass uncommented. But that was the old pattern, the one that had grown 9 tails. They typed, "Hey, about last night. I wasn't actually fine. I was dealing with something and I should have just said that instead of pretending. Sorry for the weird exit." Yuki's response came almost immediately. "No worries. You good now?" Ray paused, feeling the weight of automatic reassurance trying to form. Pushed past it. Getting there. "It's been a strange 24 hours. Want to meet up later, and I can..." "Explain?" "Yes." "Coffee at 2? Perfect." The phone screen went dark, and in its black mirror Ray checked their reflection one more time. Just them. No shadow of foxes, no doubled smiles. Just their own face, looking back with an expression that was tentative but honest. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Ray found that breaking one pattern didn't automatically break all the others. The impulse to smooth things over, to say it's fine when it wasn't, to swallow complaints and pocket hurt. These reflexes were deeply rooted, worn into grooves by years of practice. But now Ray noticed them, caught themselves in the moment of deflection, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, chose differently. When a group project partner took credit for Ray's research, Ray spoke up in the next meeting. "Actually, I compiled that data. I'd appreciate credit for it." Their voice shook, but the words came out whole. When their mother made plans without consulting them, Ray said, "I need you to check with me first before scheduling things on my behalf." It felt impossibly rude until their mother simply nodded and said, "You're right. I'm sorry." Each small truth was a conscious choice, a deliberate step away from the ease of lies. And each time Ray checked a reflective surface afterward, a storefront window, a phone screen, a puddle on the sidewalk, they saw only themselves, singular and present. The mask remained at the shrine, returned to its proper place. Sometimes, walking past shop windows, Ray would catch a glimpse of fox ears in their peripheral vision, or see the suggestion of a tail in the corner of a mirror, but these were faint, momentary, reminders rather than threats. The fox had released its claim, but the teaching remained. Every lie, no matter how polite, had weight. Every untruth took something from you and gave it to the shadows that followed in reflections, learning your shape. 3 months later, Ray returned to the shrine for the winter festival. The grounds were strung with lights and filled with music, and Mrs. Tanaka's mask stall was there, doing brisk business. When Ray approached, the elderly woman smiled in recognition. "Back for another one?" she asked. "Maybe," Ray said, "but I'll pay properly this time." Mrs. Tanaka laughed. "I don't doubt it." She pulled down a mask, a different design this time, a white cat with blue eyes, playful rather than tricksterish. "This one suits you better now, I think." Ray paid, waited for change, thanked her by name. As they walked away with the mask in a paper bag, they passed a puddle that had collected near the Temizuya. Their reflection looked back, clear and singular, and the lanterns above showed only one smile, painted on paper, arriving exactly on time. In the distance, near the fox statues, Ray thought they saw a shimmer of russet fur, a flick of white-tipped tail disappearing around a corner. But when they looked directly, there was nothing, just stone guardians and the shadows of shrine, visitors moving in the evening light. The fox was gone, but the lesson remained, written in the spaces between truth and convenience. Every reflection was a test, every mirror a reminder. Speak the easy lie, and somewhere a tail would grow, patient and waiting. Speak the difficult truth and remain yourself, whole, singular and present in your own skin. The lanterns smiled once, their light warm on wet stone, and Ray smiled back with perfect synchronicity. No lag, no delay, no shadow learning to wear their face. Just themselves, finally, telling the truth of who they were becoming. Someone brave enough to be difficult when difficulty meant honesty. someone who chose presence over ease. The festival music rose around them, drums and flutes and the laughter of children, and Ray walked through it all with clear eyes and a quiet certainty that if they started to slip, if they began again to choose the comfort of lies over the risk of truth, the reflections would show them. The fox would return, patient as ever, ready to teach the same lesson again. But not tonight. Tonight, Ray's smile arrived exactly when they meant it to, and the world smiled back in perfect, honest time. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy.